So we shall do that. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for November 3rd, 2020. And hopefully we'll be done in plenty of time to watch the election results from south of the border. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? I would like to add, if I may, one item to our in-camera meeting. It could be added as 14.2, a personnel matter, which would be subject to section 24 of the FOIP legislation. If I could ask somebody to make that motion on my behalf. Thank you, Councillor McGrath. So to add agenda item 14.2, all in favor? There are none. Oh, sorry, I forgot to vote. There are none opposed. That's carried. And might I have a motion then to approve the agenda subject to the addition of item 14.2, Councillor Wilson? Thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of October 20th have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? I am in a difficult spot because I wasn't at that meeting, which is reflected in the minutes. But I do have a question about the recording of motion number 276 and 277, and whether the minutes are an accurate reflection and we need to do something else, or whether we just need to correct the minutes. The first motion is just a waiver, but it is waiver of notice to rescind a position. And motion 277, in fact, rescinds the position, and then later we appoint Mr. Greathead to fill that same position on an interim basis. So was it that the motion was to rescind Mr. Furcho's appointment to the position rather than the position, or I need to know that the minutes correctly reflect. Of course, they have to reflect what happened, but if what happened was that the motion was just a slip of the tongue and we rescinded a position, then we should fix that.
Yes.
Councillor McGrath.
Without Councillor Keller-Empey being here, I can confirm that the intention of motion 277 was to rescind the appointment of Mr. Furcho to the position of CAO.
Right, to rescind the appointment, not the position. And it is clear by motion 279 that that was the ultimate intent. Councillor Demota?
Yeah, and that's mostly my fault. I'll take the blame for that because I didn't clarify in the motion exactly what the wording should be. And I was just relying on what was being delivered by the councillor. So I could have made a better effort towards that. So I apologize to all of you for that. Thanks for bringing that to our attention.
All right, again, I don't want to suggest that the minutes are wrong. They may reflect exactly what happened, but we need to correct what we did. So I will leave it to staff. We can come back to it. But in order to move on today, I would suggest that someone make a motion to approve the minutes subject to whatever amendment is required to change that rescission of a position to rescinding an appointment. Councillor Journeau?
I'll make that motion.
Right, and now I realize once again I've left a difficult task for administration to figure out what that motion really was. But we can get it figured out. All right,
Yes.
all in favor then? There are none opposed. And Councillor Butler showed up just in time. And I see Ms. Nadon has her mic open, which is my signal that she would like to speak. So Ms. Nadon, before we get you in more difficulty, tell me how you would like to address this.
Thank you, Your Worship. We've had this discussion internally around the motions, and as you've mentioned, those motions do reflect what happened at the meeting, and we are bound to record those motions as they are presented. So that's why you see them as they are in the minutes. And we do believe that resolution number 279 has the wording that was required to effect the change council was looking for, as in rescind the appointment of Mr. Furcho and appoint Mr. Greathead as interim CAO. And I can assure you that the position of CAO cannot be rescinded by motion. We have a CAO bylaw that creates the office of the CAO, and that remains intact regardless of those motions. So if councillors agree that those minutes reflect what occurred at the last meeting, I think we are okay to proceed on as they currently are presented.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I think that is the intent of the motion that we passed at today's meeting. So thank you for that. Appreciated. And we will try and do a better job of articulating the motions in a proper way. All right, then I can move to the minutes of the organizational meeting of the 27th of October, I believe. Those minutes have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Well, again, we have a bit of lack of clarity, I think, in motion 248 and when that is to commence. I noticed that in the initial motion by Councillor McGrath, it ended with the phrase as presented in the agenda package. So that included a calendar, I think, of the balance of 2020 and all of 2021. But after we dealt with the amendment, when the motion was reread, and I will take responsibility for that, those words as presented in the agenda package were missed. So I'm not sure, again, how administration would like to approach this. I'm not suggesting that the minutes are in error, but the form of the motion left something to be desired. So in order to correct that and confirm that henceforth our intent is that all meetings, that is regular and committee of the whole meetings, commence at 9:30 a.m. is the result we're trying to achieve. So from administration's perspective, what would you like to see?
I can take this one, Your Worship. Thank you. I think there are two matters we need to address with regards to the date, time, and place of council meetings. And so you've identified the part where council's intent was that regular meetings will also start at 9:30. And the error that inserted itself there is that we don't have it documented until 2021. So I think we would require a motion from council to say that regular meetings for the remainder of 2020 be scheduled for the first and third Tuesday starting at 9:30 a.m. would be a motion that needs to be passed. But then in terms of those minutes, I believe there is a recording error in the following motion, which is resolution number 285. It should say 2020-2021 year for setting the time and place for committee of the whole. So it's twofold. We need a new motion for the rest of 2020 for regular meetings, and we need an amendment to resolution number 285 to say 2020, 2021 year. I hope that's clear as mud. It just so happens that 2021 is just a bad combination of numbers, it seems.
Yes, it could be 2021 or 2021. All right. I don't have a written form of motion before me, and there is a technical question of whether we can at this time change the or do business that was to have been done in the organizational meeting, but I think it's always open to council to pass motions regarding its own conduct. So Councillor McGrath, if you would like to make a motion that our regular council meetings be scheduled for the first and third Tuesdays of each month for the balance of this year and all of 2021, commencing at 9:30 a.m. That I think would be in order.
Yes, I move that motion.
Councillor Journeau.
Small details, maybe not all of 2021, right? Up till October of 2021, because we have a change of council thereafter.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Councillor McGrath, you'll accept that addition to your motion. Thank you. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I was on the same thought process, and I was going to suggest until the next organizational meeting of council, just to make it a little bit tighter.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question and not try and reinvent a new motion. All in favor? There are none opposed. That's carried. And then Councillor Demota, similar motion with respect to correcting what is now motion number 285. That is to encompass the balance of the year 2020 and all of the year 2021 up until the next organizational meeting.
Yeah, I'm good to move that.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor? There are none opposed. That's carried. All right. Well, thank you all for your patience working through that. And then I think we have not yet approved those minutes from the organizational meeting. We've corrected them. Can I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the organizational meeting of October 27th? Councillor Butler? Thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried.
Your worship,
Councillor Butler.
I'd just like to suggest to administration that they make a note to file for that confusion over the dates, because it could happen to us again in 101 years. And I think it would be helpful if they recorded that for future consideration.
All right, thank you for that. Agenda item 4, presentations. We have the Jasper Municipal Library representatives here today to present their budget request to council. I see that I have all of Sandy Cox, Angie Tom, Angie Lemure, and Stephen Eldred. So whichever of you individuals would like to proceed, go ahead. I've now lost my capacity to see who may have a hand up because I'm looking at a screenshot of the budget. So if anybody needs to interject, I will just request that you do so verbally and get my attention, and we'll deal with it then. So go ahead, who's ever whoever has their mic open.
Okay, thank you very much. I apologize that I can't get my video working, but anyway, you don't need to really see me, but good afternoon. And thank you very much for inviting us to present our proposed budget to council. The budget committee of Stephen Eldred, Angela Lemire, and myself, Sandy Cox, and our director, Angie Tom, are here today. In March, our world was turned upside down. The library was closed and our municipal grant was drastically reduced, which led to a significant reduction in library services. Since libraries were closed during stage 1, this helped us to save money for when we were able to gradually reopen in a safe manner during stage 2. We will have to use reserves to help us meet the shortfall in our 2020 budget. As trustees, we are advocates for our library, and through the Alberta Libraries Act, we have responsibilities that are clearly defined. One of the responsibilities we are charged with is to secure adequate funding for library operations. We look for efficiencies, and we saved money this year by researching our health benefit costs, and we switched to a new health provider, which amounted to a 1,000 annual savings. During these difficult times, this was most welcome. With the increased diligence necessitated by health and safety measures, our director has an added responsibility to ensure that we are following protocols. As a board, we have to ensure that she has the time to do this important work, and we need the funds to ensure that we can meet all requirements as they roll out during this pandemic. The municipal grant is our chief source of revenue and largely determines the services we are able to offer to the community. We are hopeful that in 2021, council will be able to increase the municipal grant as we look to recover. Council has their strategic plan. The library has a provincially mandated plan of service, which guides us as we respond to the needs of the community. We just completed one this spring, and this plan determines what we value, guides how we act, and informs the decisions that we make now and in the future. We have gone from 54 hours per week, which placed us in the exemplary level of service, to 30 hours per week. We dismissed 2 staff members, and now we are only open 4 days per week. These measures were a direct result of the municipal grant reduction. Libraries were not eligible for many of the business grants that were available. As we look to recovery, we hope to return to 54 hours per week by 2025, and this is reflected in our 5-year plan. Our library offers the community a place to gather both physically and virtually, to share ideas and to access a variety of programs and services. We have patrons who appreciate access to computers and Wi-Fi. And the library is a place where they can learn how to access e-resources. To meet this goal, we need trained staff to facilitate this. This was particularly important during the COVID closures. We have single parents who are grateful for libraries as a place to go that doesn't cost money. Programming at the library gives them opportunities that they might not be able to access otherwise. We have youth who have outgrown after-school care and need a safe place to gather and participate in a variety of programs. We have children who love coming to our story hours and the many planned activities for families. Early literacy skills help children prepare for success in schools. In the long term, success in schools leads to a higher graduation rate in our community. We have partnerships in the community and we coordinate programs to help meet a variety of needs. Our director and staff attend community conversations and through this gain an understanding of emerging needs within the community at large. We have seasonal staff who visit the library as a place to gather and access resources. We have newcomers who look to the library as a place to feel welcome and safe. We have visitors from around the world who look to the library as a place to access local information and the internet. Some of these activities are now restricted, but our creative staff has looked for ways to offer these services in innovative ways. During Culture Days, the library offered author readings, which are now housed on our YouTube channel. Check them out if you weren't able to watch these live. We have carefully examined the level of funding that we need to offer services to our community and to establish a path forward. Certain activities and operating costs will continue to be affected by the ongoing pandemic. If our 2021 municipal grant remains low, we will have to further reduce hours, lay off trained staff, and cut library programs. We will not be able to meet our plan of service. Historically, the Municipal Council provides grants that allowed us to develop a comprehensive library program. A library is more than a book exchange. It is a hub in our community. The municipal grant amount that we receive for 2021 will determine the direction we will be able to take. The 190,000 needed will provide for a sustainable library program as we move forward. In 2022, we celebrate our 80th anniversary. We have come a long way from a small collection of books in the basement of the Information Center. As we look to the future, we envision a library that welcomes the community and offers programs and resources to enrich our lives. The board would like to thank you for this opportunity. And now at this point, we are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mrs. Cox. I will call for questions from council. I wonder though, Mrs. Cox, if you can stop your screen sharing or whoever is doing that. Perfect. Now I can see people again. Thank you. Questions from councillors? Councillor McGrath and then Councillor Wilson.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Tom, Mrs. Lemure, Mrs. Cox, and Mr. Eldred for the presentation. And thank you to the entire library board who has put in lots and lots of hours, lots and lots of care into from the day one when your budget was dramatically reduced by the municipality. You were able to flow with the times and adapt and move through policy and procedure creation to move through safe work practices and to reestablish services as they became safe for our community. And I think that you deserve a huge amount of gratitude for everything that you've done on behalf of our community when it comes to providing the library services that you do. And I'm proud to be part of the library board. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, again, thank you very much for the presentation. My was just a question of interest. You said be back to 54, or the plan was to be back to 54 hours a week by 2025. What does the next few years look like? So, 2021, what are you hoping to be open?
We're hoping for next year to be open for 30 hours per week, I believe. Angie, Tom, can you clarify that if that's incorrect?
If everything goes smoothly, we're hoping to add probably 14 hours to that. So we should be up to 40 hours a week. That will depend on staffing and pandemic requirements as it is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Other questions from councillors? If not, Mrs. Cox, I have a question and delegate as you wish, but with respect to the budget numbers, as I read what we've been presented, it shows the 2019 actuals and then budget and actuals for 2020 to September 30th and then proposed for 2021. There is a $40,000 draw from reserves for 2020, which I take it from other notes is 20,000 from operational reserves and 20 from additional reserves. Can you tell me, was that a pre-budget, that is a pre-COVID budgeted transfer from reserves, or did that come in response to COVID? And what is the expectation moving forward for transfers back to reserves or reestablishing whatever reserves you had?
Angie, did you want to take this one?
I can do. The one of the policies that the library board has in place is a $20,000 operational reserve that is there. So it was sitting to be used in case of emergencies such as this. The additional $20,000 was in response to COVID. Neither of these were planned. It was in response to the closures and the cut in the municipal grant. And as far as recovery of those, that has not been a discussion point yet. There is a feeling that 2021 will be a challenge as well. And yeah, so there hasn't been a discussion on that point yet.
All right, thank you. And those reserves now, is it accurate that they have been depleted and you don't have recourse to those reserves for 2021 in any event?
We do have additional reserves that can be allocated to operational. But as you mentioned, we're depleting those. And you know, as we move forward, we'll have to see and reassess how that goes.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Journeau.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and the folks from the library board. I still have a hard time with the numbers here. 2 years ago, we gave you, the municipality gave you a subsidy of 195,000 and you're operating at 54 hours a week. You're down to 30 hours a week, but you're asking us for 190. To me, that doesn't compute very well. You're hoping to go to 44, okay, hoping. And I realize that there are some COVID restrictions and, you know, additional costs. The one thing that I see here is somebody made a comment that, well, if we don't give it to you, you're going to cut further. But if there's additional costs in doing business, should the user not be paying more? You know, a long time ago, just after COVID broke out, there's 64 ways in which our life's going to change. And I think that we have to keep those things in mind. Things will change. So I think that your approach to serving the customers and being open and so on and so forth, I think has to be reviewed here, because you're going to reduce your hours by 44%, and yet we're only going to reduce the contribution by like 2%. I just don't like what's happening here. Sorry, this is not a question, more of a comment, but I think that there should be some discussion along the way about increasing user fees because there's an additional cost.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. As indicated, not strictly speaking a question, but if anyone from the Municipal Library Board wishes to respond, you're welcome to.
I can respond to that. It's Angie Lemire.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Right now in Alberta, and I'm not sure what it's like in the rest of the country, libraries are moving to not charge user fees, and memberships are free to the public because the library is a public building. And I've noted with interest that we were one of the few libraries that charged user fees last year. And if you look on the budget, that netted us $8,000. And that this year, from January to March, prior to COVID, we netted $1,500. And since then, because of reduced hours, we have not been charging membership fees. And it's actually been a bit of a discussion on our library board. We would like not to have to charge user fees. We would like our library to be open to all who come in. The user fees are for Xeroxing, and I think that's about it. And usage of some of the rooms for invigilance of exams.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Lemire. Councillor McGrath.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Lemire. And as Ms. Lemire stated, that is becoming the norm across Alberta. As the regional representative on the Yellowhead Regional Library Board, it is common to see all of the other communities surrounding us no longer charging membership fees. It's becoming best practice in the library world to not seek membership fees from their residents in the community.
Mr. Eldred.
I can just say something quickly. It's come up in our meetings where if people are charged user fees, they sort of feel like they're being charged twice because the institution is funded by the public already. So.
Thank you for that. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, and thank you, Mrs. Cox, and all of you for your concise presentation. Just following up a little on a couple of questions that have already been asked. I'm just curious about your anticipated staffing costs for 2021, because I see that combined all costs in, including staff and casual and benefits, what you would propose for those line items for 2021 comes very close to the actual 2019 numbers. Yet I understand that you expect to be operating still on considerably reduced hours for 2021 in view of COVID restrictions. So it looks like a bit of a discrepancy to me, and I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Mrs. Tom.
Part of that is the board had passed last year an increase on salaries for every 2 years. It just happens that 2021 is that year when the 2% increases are to go ahead. The other is to recover some of the staffing. Part of, in response to COVID, staffing levels have actually been upped. So we have 3 people on at all times, so that there's always somebody who can be at the desk in a safe environment to answer phones and respond to the public, while somebody else is out cleaning, dealing, assisting people find stuff, that kind of thing. The hope is 2022, we won't need as many people on as we do right now to accomplish all the things that we need to do to be COVID safe, so that we can stretch, does that sound right? The staffing, so that we don't have to we can get away with having 2 people on at one time to accomplish the same things, because some of those COVID requirements will not be needed, or at least not at the levels that they are needed now.
Thank you. And I have one other, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you. And on a different topic then, I'm just noticing sorry, I've lost it here, the line item for donations from Friends of the Library. And I see it's far down in 2020, which is certainly to be anticipated. And you have no proposed contribution there from Friends of the Library for 21. And I don't even really know who or what Friends of the Library is. And so I just like some background and understanding of that. Thank you.
Mrs. Cox.
The Friends of the Library is basically our society, and we are able to raise funds on a fairly limited basis. For example, we raised approximately $2,000 with the arts raffle this summer. When we do our garden tour, which we weren't able to do this year because of COVID, and it only raises about $2,000. And then the bigger fundraiser is when we participate in a casino in St. Albert. And of course, this year, those were also canceled. And that's our biggest area where we can raise funds is through our casinos. And we're not sure if that'll even happen for next year. So at the present time, we may be able to go back in next year and get a date to raise money. But that basically is not, we cannot use that funding basically for operations. We can use it for very specific equipment, but we couldn't use it for staffing or most of our operation costs, to my understanding. So in the past, our library is basically funded through our municipal grant. And as an organization, we don't have a huge capacity to raise a lot of money. And as others have already said, there is a movement in the world to have libraries without a charge. And so our membership charge, the funding, the money that we can raise through charging a membership fee, it's pretty minuscule because our staffing and our healthcare costs are our biggest expenses. So yeah, I hope that it helps clarify things for you, Councillor.
It does. It completely fills in the blanks there. When you mentioned those two local fundraising things, I hadn't really connected them to the library, but now I understand. And of course, it's understandable why those numbers have dropped off dramatically. Thanks.
Yeah.
Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I think this is more directed to our Director of Finance if Ms. Malinchuk is available. I'm just looking at the opportunities that might present themselves through the most funding or the grant that the potential $3.3 million that may be coming to Jasper, whether we're able to use that up to its entirety or not. I understand that the library is an external entity, but we have an MGA requirement to fund our local library. So having said that, because of they're reliant on the municipal portion coming through for their operations, could there be a place in looking at finding some funding through MOST to help compensate some of the tax burden, I guess, going forward?
Good afternoon, Your Worship, through to Councillor Demota. I still have yet to have the opportunity to speak to a grant advisor on this MOST funding. I think that they're very busy. And so I have not had the chance. However, I have written it down on my list since it was, they just indicated how they removed some of the reserves to cover the year. So it is on my list to talk to them about this situation as well as other questions.
That's good. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot that way, but it's still some of the stipulations and regulations are going to be somewhat vague until we can understand exactly what we can apply to there. But you know, I'm glad that you were taking notes on that, and I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities everywhere, and I understand how busy that portfolio may be. But thank you very much. I just wanted to check in on that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Are there any further questions from council? And I see no other mics unmuted. So I think that covers it. Again, then I will thank Mrs. Tom, Mrs. Lemire, Mrs. Cox, and Mr. Eldred for, as Councillor Butler called it, I think a very concise and I would add helpful presentation. Mrs. Cox, you did mention in your opening remarks the plan of service that you have. Is that a publicly available document?
Yes, it is. If you would like a copy of that, I'm sure we could send you one. We have to submit it to the Alberta Libraries branch. And so they do have a copy of it. And yeah, it's available. If you would like to see it, we could for sure send it to you.
Well, I would appreciate that if it's publicly available. I should be able to find it, but it's always helpful if you can send it. And I won't have questions on it. I just like to see it.
Yep.
So thank you very much. And Councillor McGrath, you had your hand up.
I can arrange that to be sent to council from the library board.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you again for your attendance today. And we will take this all into account as we proceed with our budget deliberations. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
And agenda item 4.2 is next then. And I saw earlier Mr. Schmidt standing by for a presentation on behalf of Jasper Victim Services. There he is, Mr. Schmidt, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I appreciate that in the spot that we're in, it's been a difficult year for certain with all the changes that have been going on. So I appreciate being involved and being able to make a presentation for our budget for 2021 and for the municipal's budget. Obviously with COVID-19 restraints, there was a lot that came along, and totally understanding of those cuts for Jasper Victim Services as well from a municipality. And certainly and I know there's just unavoidable things that had to happen. So I understand that. It's just been a world of extreme change for certain. For March of 2020 is the end of March when we found out that our Justice and Solicitor General grant, which we'd applied for at $150,000, which is the cap for rural areas, came back at $119,300. So we had a $33,000 cut from our ask there. Our golf tournament, just the way that the COVID year was, which was $30,000 to $35,000 each of the last couple of years, raised about $10,000 this year. So we had a significant reduction there. So we've certainly been working in a world with a lot less funding than usual. And we will be spending into our reserves to keep service delivery the way that it has been in Jasper for the last number of years. We have had quite a bit of change over the last 12 years since I've been involved with victim services. We've gone from, a very small budget of $50,000 a year from the Solicitor General up to $142,500 was where we were for the 2019 year. And as I mentioned, even from that number, a significant reduction down to $119,000. It's the first time we've had a reduction from the Solicitor General. And so that is going to create some challenges for us. But they are in a major review process. So I've been quite involved myself. I am one of the past presidents from our association, and there's actually 5 of us now sitting on the current executive for the Alberta Police-Based Victim Service Association. So as a municipal program from Jasper, we've been discussing, as well as from that association with MLA Pitt and MLA Neudorf. And so they're doing a complete review of service delivery in the province. So what comes out of that might be some significant changes in the long run. I'm positive that we're being well heard and that victim services are, moving forward and looking forward to what the new funding process and the new service delivery will look like. So I'm optimistic that things will stay, they're saying to actually improve, and you have to see how that's actually going to pan out. It's going to be recommendations going basically to the minister, and it'll be up to the minister's decision to make, final decisions, obviously, on how that turns out. There have been a lot of changes for victim services in general in the province. Financial benefits is no longer at all the same that it used to be. Victims used to be able to apply. I've seen many people over the years get over $12,000 in financial benefits, and I always refer to it as an allotment because I don't think there's any benefit to what's happened to any of our victims. Yet that was money that they could spend on counseling, spend on schooling, spend on recreation, wherever they felt those funds needed to be spent. Those funds are completely gone. Someone with major injuries, say paralyzed and going to be in a wheelchair for a prolonged period of time, would be able to still apply. There's funds that are available for someone to be able to apply for emergency shelter and things like that, which may assist us as Jasper Victim Services. We've been providing a lot of those services for years, but it doesn't change the fact that a lot of the people we're working with don't have the funds to pay up front for the hotel rooms here in Jasper, or the accommodation costs and things like that, that we have been able to cover and we need to continue to cover. So our whole world is kind of changing that way. Funding wise is a big piece. So our request is still to be included in this year's budget at $12,500, which is similar to the $12,000 that we had for this year, which was cut back to $9,500. And as I mentioned, I don't see that as a major impediment to us, and I completely understand where councils had to make some difficult decisions. One really positive thing that I would like to bring up, and it's because we've had this conversation for many years now, at least 11 years. I'm sure we've had the conversation about Parks Canada being involved at our table and being able to contribute to victim services. Fortunately, that is one thing that came in February, that we are receiving $12,000 for the 2019-20 year from them, as well as the 2020-2021 year. So we've got sort of a 2-year plan in place, and hopefully that'll be extended longer term. And certainly that's one piece that helped us get through this past year. It was good to have, a new source of income that we hadn't had in the 12 years previous. So I didn't have a really long presentation. That's kind of the main points from what I shared with you back in September. So we've had that for a couple of months now. The other pages are some quotes from victims, which I don't think I would read or really refer to specifically, but we really do have a very positive response from victims that are served here in Jasper. I think we're well situated with good advocates that are willing to spend their time and assist on call, as well as myself being on call a lot of the time, especially over this COVID. For 6 months, I was the only one on call. That's just the way we operated. Advocates were requested not to be on our on-call system, so I was the only person on call for that entire initial period. And now we do have advocates on call, and they're totally understanding that they're able to do what they can by phone if that's what they're comfortable with. If they're not feeling comfortable with someone wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, those types of things, there's a little bit of leeway there, certainly for our advocates to protect themselves and work in their own comfort zone for things. Just because I didn't have stats at the time in my presentation, I can tell you just a few real quick things that sort of stand out to me. In total, we have a few less files, not a significant difference, about 10, which that could flex from year to year. I think we've had in general pretty similar file numbers for Jasper Victim Services. We did see definitely a slight increase, slight decrease in sexual assault violence with bars being closed. I suspect that's a big piece of that. It does make a difference to that late nightlife that sometimes leads to that inappropriate behavior, obviously. Domestic violence did increase by quite a number of files, by about 4 from 19 to 23 this year. So it sort of stands to reason that with people being sort of crammed together and not having the usual space to be able to get out and work and all the other things that are causing stress for people, it is evident in our stats. We did have a reduction in the number of assaults. And again, I think that's likely due to bars being closed. That's a lot of the assaults that we have are related to late night bar behaviors. Pretty insignificant differences on a lot of other things. Those are the sort of A-type criminal code conduct pieces. We do have some criminal code that are nonviolent, so thefts and frauds. And again, it sort of makes sense. I think that thefts are actually down to almost half, and frauds have basically tripled. So stuff that people can do online and do over the phone, those things are still happening. The physical theft of things is less prominent this year so far anyways. This doesn't include the last quarter, obviously, for October, November, December. The pieces that we do that are really considered to be outside of the mandate of victim services, there's many victim services units that do them across the province, but those things like mental health, assisting with suicides, assisting with attempted suicide, serious injuries like in car accidents, those have all stayed fairly consistent. Slight increase in the number of sudden deaths that we worked with this year, but overall numbers are fairly similar from other years. And yeah, so that's kind of, I wanted to make sure a little bit aware of our service delivery. I really don't feel it's changed significantly. Some of the files are more serious in some regards and some less serious. Some of the domestics that we have may be arguments right now and they're reported as a domestic, but they may not have been physically involved with one another. So sometimes we're sort of, an area where we can help provide resources and some counseling for people before it gets escalated. So it's good that we have some files that aren't more serious on that level, but some of those they're still in court. The go process and everything that happens after an event like that, which is very unfortunate. So yeah, I'm more than willing to answer any questions, and certainly if there's something I need a little research into, I can look up numbers and things like that. There's things I need to get back to you with, but that's really my presentation. I think over Zoom, we've all been spending a lot of time there this past 7-8 months. So I think I didn't want to take a whole lot of your time, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Questions from councillors, beginning with Councillor McGrath.
Thank you so much for your presentation today, Mr. Schmidt. And I think in the line of work that you're a professional in, every year is a hard year. And having this underlying hardship and heartache in this specific time that we're all going through globally, extra gratitude to you and your team for helping those victims through all of the scenarios that you help them through day in and day out. Our community is what it is because of the work that you guys do, and it's so appreciated. And really great news to hear that federal funding is now in place to assist victim services. That's something to celebrate for sure. So good job, and good job on the legwork that was behind that, I'm sure. And thank you very much to Parks Canada for contributing to this meaningful service in our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Other questions from councillors? Councillor Butler and then Councillor Journeau.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much. Thank you, Paul, very much for your presentation. And I will echo Councillor McGrath's gratitude on behalf of the community. I do have a couple of 3 questions about, particularly about the financials that you've given to us. I understand where this says year 1 and year 2, that is the calendar years 21 and 22 that would be referred to here. Is that right?
That's right, yes. And then the actual grant, when it came through, did cut us down to just a 1-year grant. So no victim services, well, most victim services in the province are no longer getting a 2 or 3 year grant. We were always getting a 3-year, and now we're cut back to a 1-year grant.
And is that the Victims of Crime Fund funding request? Is that the line that you're referring to?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so you know you've obtained that for 2021, but you don't know that you've obtained it for 2022.
This is we end up using that as our budget for Jasper Victim Services, and it is the request that we proposed. So that first line that says $150,000, that's the max for rurals that we could request. Okay. And that was actually cut back to $119,000. So it doesn't reflect, this budget does miss some of the pieces. It doesn't include the money that we spend on hotel rooms, transportation, and meals for people when they are stranded here, because they will not cover that. So we know that that's a part of our budget that's not listed on this budget. It also, it does include all of the income that we have. And of course, that was majorly adjusted this year too, with the lack of funding from our golf tournament and stuff. So yeah, this budget is now a little bit misleading, but it's the numbers. That's where I will be spending into our reserves this year. The actual budget's not changing from what was presented to you, but the amount provided by the Solicitor General on that top line was $33,000 less than what's on there.
Okay. I kind of, Your Worship, may I continue with a couple of questions I don't want to take up. Thank you. So I was going to ask the question about the top line that says it does not include those items, transportation, accommodation, and other essentials provided. But if it doesn't include those, where does the funding for those items come from? Not within. That's
the funding when we're applying to the municipality of Jasper and to Parks Canada, our golf tournament. So the funding that doesn't come from Solicitor General can be used on those. That's why our proposal to the municipality has always been specific to include those traumatic incidents where we do get involved, so that we are able to, shelter someone who's now stranded here or stuck here, or needing that assistance.
All right, thank you. And so to that point of municipal funding, you've listed 9,500 in year 1 and 2 under municipal, but this is where your actual request is, in fact, for 12,500.
That's right.
And my last question, item 5 on your budget is a federal contribution of $12,000. Is that the Parks Canada contribution?
The federal piece, yes, that's the Parks Canada contribution.
So then my question is, I'm just wondering why in year 2 that then is reduced in this budget to 4,000. It was that.
So again, the year that this was 2020, 2021. So our current one ends in April of 2021. So it's basically one.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because it doesn't correlate with your.
Their fiscal year is different than ours.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and my last question, which is not on the budget, is I'm just curious about governance of victim services, and I see you have noted here and highlighted see attached list of board members, but that list I don't see here. And so I'm just curious how the organization is governed. You have a board of directors. I'm wondering how is that board selected and who sits on it, and how does that work?
Okay, thank you. It should be there as the second appendix. So that's I really appreciate our board. I think it's good to mention who they are. So Ryan Verge from Addictions is on our board. He's our board president. Greg Van Tegem from the fire department is our vice president. Angela Franklin is our treasurer. Maura McKinnon from Parks is our secretary. Dorothy Marquis. I think it's significant that her husband is a retired CNer, and he used to be on our board. So it's still a connection to that CN community in town, as well as Dorothy has a wealth of accounting experience. So that's great to have her there. Anne-Marie Pilgrim, who was the charge nurse for the hospital, is one of our directors. Amber Burgess is a current nurse, is a director. Kenny Linklater is a retired gentleman that's joined our board. And then we always have a liaison. Right now it's Constable Scott Holden, and I always keep Sergeant Rick Badese in the loop. He doesn't particularly sit on our board, but he's always aware of any decisions being made.
Great. That fills in the blanks for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor Journeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Paul, for your presentation and the work that you do for us. It's a question that I've asked before, question or comment, and I still don't see a line in that getting fundraising, doing some fundraising with past users, benefactors of this. You use comments like you always get a positive response. Use another comment, they don't have the money to pay up front for a hotel, but that tells me they have money. So have we requested them to reimburse us in some cases? And have we done any fundraising by that group of benefactors? If you know that, if you're a member of War Amps of Canada, for example, and you get the benefit, you could be a regular member, but if you have to use their services for lost keys, they'll hound you for extra money and over and over and over again. So I receive the benefit, and I have a kind of, when I get a notice, it kind of perks my interest. And yes, quite often I will increase my contribution. So I've brought this up before, and I don't see it in here, and I would like to get your comments and feedback on that, please. Thank you.
Yeah, there are some circumstances where I have asked if people are able to make a reimbursement to us, and we've had some of the donations line that you'll see there. Our donations are over, in the average of about $5,000 a year, and some of those are coming from people who have benefited as victims. I have not and would not go to a sex assault victim or domestic violence victim and ask them if they would like to contribute to Jasper Victim Services after the great services that we've provided. I don't feel it would be appropriate whatsoever. And that's just, I don't think you'd find that any different to any other victim service agency in the country, certainly not in Alberta. I'm not aware of anyone going to those victims and saying, now would you be able to pay for the service that we've provided for you, or do you see a value in the service we're providing? Would you help us provide that for others? I feel that would be a very detrimental conversation, and I wouldn't use my files to go back to make those phone.
Thank you both for that. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, thank you for acknowledging me. And anyway, Councillor Butler pretty much covered everything I wanted to ask, but I do want to extend a thanks to Mr. Schmidt and all your efforts and the contribution that Victim Services provides for our community. And I have no problem looking at the request for funding and moving forward to that. It's been a great benefit for our community, and congratulations too for getting the funding that you can, and impressive that you're able to convince Parks Canada to contribute, because they see the benefit in what it brings to the community. So congratulations on your efforts, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions from council, I have a brief couple of questions, Mr. Schmidt. And again, I thank you for the presentation, and I'm very supportive. It's a very modest ask for a very important services provided to the community. And my questions are not about your budget so much as your funding sources generally. And so for the municipal contribution, you cite $2.50 per capita. I'm wondering whether that is, for want of a better word, an industry standard, or is that a local standard that you and Victim Services come up with here? And secondly, what is the manner of calculation of the provincial grant? So you said that for rural areas, it is $150,000 maximum, but you received only $119,000. Is that based on caseload or busyness, or do you find that to be somewhat an arbitrary allotment from a maximum fund? Can you explain on what basis you get the other funding? Is it per capita, or is it something else recognizable?
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. I think there's kind of two questions there. The amount of $250 per person came from even 12 years ago when I first started researching into it. And we've got about 76 programs in the province. And the ones that were being funded by the municipalities, that was the average. Some a little more, some a little less, and some not funded at all, I'm being honest. But the ones that were being funded, that's what I looked at, and that was kind of the average range. And that's where we've always sort of had our ask or our request at. As far as the amount that's provided by the Justice and Solicitor General, this year they cut back. It's a huge amount. We were probably getting about $10,000 a year, $11,000 a year in regards to training. So they've cut that back to a maximum of $1,000 a year. There is not training available that's impactful and important for our advocates to have at $1,000 a year. It just doesn't exist. And so that is going to be a long-term issue for Victim Services across the province. No one's getting more than $1,000 a year right now. And without that funding, we've dropped over this COVID period and just before even. So we've gone from 13 volunteers down to currently 6. That's COVID related. It's also training related, and knowing what's coming here in the future and the changes that the province has been making towards victim services. So we've got a lot of hurdles already, and then not being able to train those staff to feel confident in the valued work that they're doing, and also rewarded and feeling there's valuable training for their time and their volunteering with us as Victim Services. I mean, it includes everything from CPR training to next of kin notification, critical incident stress management training. We have a conference in Banff every 2 years. That's usually a peak in our training. It costs a lot of money to take people down to Banff and be a part of that, but it's very comprehensive training as well as rewarding for people that are there. So they've really cut that back. That's the major part where they've cut back the funding, was out of training. Yeah, and that's the rural areas are $150,000 cap. The municipalities were $300,000 and they were doubled to $600,000. So the 5 municipalities in the province are better funded now. That happened with the previous government, and they didn't get around to rural areas beforehand. So that amount of $150,000 has not increased since 2008. That's been the cap. And that's the year I started with Victim Services here. So it is limiting.
Right. Well, I thank you for that. And it seems to me that, pardon the pun, but you are and your organization is also the victim of the more general challenge that we face in this community, and the municipality faces it all the time. That is the so-called shadow population, or serving a much larger visitor population than residential population. But you get no credit for that extra degree of work that falls on your organization. So if you can think of any ways that we could assist you approaching the province to take some recognition of the fact that you are also serving a visitor population, I would certainly be open to helping you in that regard. So if anything comes to mind, I invite you to let us know.
Yeah, I appreciate it. When, like I said, with MLA Pitt and MLA Newdorf, we're going in just now into the second phase of their review. So if there's an opportunity there to request from council, I certainly will. And maybe one thing I should have added to that, yes, it doesn't really reflect the numbers of like, it's not because we have fewer numbers this year that we've got less funding. So that's not the issue. There is an issue that at $76 million surplus in the Victims of Crime Fund, it's now called Victims of Crime and Public Security. So they're going to be spending those funds on bylaw on your corner for whatever they want to spend it on. ACERT and more RCMP members is what they've quoted, and drug courts and 50 new lawyers. I don't know, 50 lawyers a year. I don't think that seems very feasible. That 6 million will last very long, but that's the kind of changes that they just recently made to the Victims of Crime Fund to open up that spending. And that money doesn't come from taxpayer dollars. It only comes from criminals. Those have, paid into fines or after a court appearance. So they've never have paid out the amounts that are within that fund. And the reserve is built up until that point where it's now at $76 million. But it's now going to be spent basically on general expenses instead of victims.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I would like just
all right, if there are
all the comments.
Go ahead.
But I do appreciate all the comments, and the one piece that I wanted to just comment to for Councillor McGrath is the fact that, and I appreciate a lot of positive comments from everyone, but the one thing that's really stuck on my mind through this time is it's been difficult about the work through COVID is I'm doing very empathetic work. I think I am an empathetic person, and when I'm in front of somebody, I can convey that. It's been difficult doing it over the phone and through emails and things like that. So I really appreciate what you said, and just wanted to just really agree that's been a strange time to be doing this kind of work. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Agenda item 5, is there any business arising from the previous minutes? That would be the minutes of the regular meeting of October 20th or the organizational meeting of October 27th. If not, then agenda item 6, department reports, beginning with Mr. Van Tighem, Director of Protective Services, and our Fire Chief. Is Mr. Van Tighem there?
Your Worship, I just spoke to him briefly, and he's injured today, and he's not into work. So his report's in front of him, or in front of council. He had no additions really to do that, except for to mention that the Fire Smart program has started and it's commenced, but due to the weather changes, there's no active burning going on currently. And that'll be kind of caught up as they go along. But that's as much as I have to add to the written report submitted by Mr. Van Tighem.
Thank you for that, Mr. Greathead. Are there any questions from councillors for Mr. Greathead to take back to Mr. Van Tighem? I had one question, and I would just like, and Mr. Greathead, you may not have the answer to this, and I can contact Mr. Van Tighem later, but in fire prevention, he has a reference to assisting with the installation of lock boxes throughout the town. Can anybody explain to me what that is? I understood lock boxes to be, is that just for keys so they can get into a house if they need to?
Yes.
So a lockbox that you would have for visitor accommodation also serves the fire department, and they would then have access to a building. Is that what that reference is?
I believe that is it for those, and if there's a building with elevator controls or any of those specialized keys, I can verify that with Mr. Van Tegel though.
Thank you for that. If there is nothing else, then thank Mr. Van Tegel for that report. And we can stay with you, I believe, Mr. Greathead, are going to give us a verbal report on agenda item 6.2.
Yes, when we did the sidewalk seating, your worship, part of it was this was a pilot program and that there would be a review process to determine the success and viability of this program going forward. I have been in touch with Jasper Chamber of Commerce that reached out to me, and they're eager to make sure that we keep this ball rolling. And then following my discussions with Parks Canada too, we should have a review completed and a determination of how we're going to proceed, if we're going to proceed with this, if we want to get it approved in time for spring, because it'll have to go through the entire PDAC procedure and all of that. So I'm really just looking for the terms of reference, really, I guess, of how we're going to establish how we're going to review this program this year.
Councillor Demota.
Well, I appreciate this being brought forward, and I believe that we're council was waiting on getting some information back from administration and bylaw to see how everything rolled out, and any recommendations that might come forward, and then maybe talking to Parks Canada and getting feedback from their side. But I think that council should set a date into that review, because I know that a lot of people are looking forward to having some briefing on what happened this year, and then you know, the sooner we can start talking about what type of provisions or enhancements that we can make to 2020 for 2021, I think would be appropriate. And spring will be here before we know it, so I don't want to get caught you know, running behind this. So the quicker we can get information and follow up and come up with a game plan, and then definitely set a date to start looking at things and making a decision, I think would be good for us.
Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'm curious if there's any appetite from council to form a ad hoc subcommittee to designate work on the subject of downtown. We had Community Futures working on a downtown revitalization project. We had operations interested in the downtown. We have the sidewalk seating to consider for next season, as well as Mrs. Toop provided us with a fairly thorough presentation in an agenda, was it in October or at the end of September? And I know she's really interested in the safety and pedestrianization of downtown. I'm curious if we could form a working group to delegate this to, so that we can, because the time is now, we need to start this in November to be able to be successful, and not speaking about this in June of next summer. But let's decide a way in which we can move through this process that's both effective and meaningful for the community.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Other comments? Councillor Demota?
Well, I think that's a really respectable and proactive approach. And I'm not volunteering myself to be on that committee, but I think it's a good idea. So however council, when or where we can make that decision, maybe that has to go through the legislative committee, I'm not sure, but I think a decision on that is warranted.
Well, I don't argue the premise presented by Councillor McGrath. This could, though, fall under the Economic Recovery Task Force, presumably. There is a group, I think, that was looking at streetscape sort of generally, and sidewalk furniture and so forth, although not a committee of ours. And there are some larger issues, as Councillor McGrath indicated, say the report presented to us by Ms. Toop on an earlier agenda. My concern is that just as the municipality is entering into budget considerations right now for next year, I would presume that many, if not most of our downtown commercial enterprises are doing the same. And in terms of this narrow question of enhanced sidewalk seating or sidewalk use, there is, if not an urgency, at least an immediacy to that, so they can budget with some knowledge of what's coming next year. I think that generally, anecdotally, at least without having seen the report, I was favorably impressed by what happened this summer, and that was all on a shoestring with no notice. People just responded. Had they had the time to properly budget and plan, we might have seen a much better product. And I would like to give our businesses the opportunity to do that if, in fact, we choose to try it again. And it looks like COVID is not going to appreciably subside before next summer, but that, of course, is an unknown. But on this one issue, we did say that we would revisit it after October 16th, and it is now after October 16th. So my question on the more narrow issue of the enhanced sidewalk use is how quickly can we expect a report from either our partners at the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce or our own administration, so that we can set some timelines to get on this, because quite frankly, I think it would be unfair to the commercial sector for us to wait until spring when they need to start doing their budgeting and planning now as we do. So Mr. Greathead, I would start with you. If you have any sense of when we could expect any kind of report from either Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce or our own administration.
Your worship, I understand that just a discussion I had with the bylaw department that they didn't really run into too many issues this year. That given the time frame, it ran as smoothly as it possibly could. As we were trying to react for and catch as many of the summer weekends as we could. I'm not sure what a report from admin would look like at this point. Yeah, there's more to it, I think, that would need to go into, and I think it's more kind of gets into the council realm, where did you like the aesthetics, not just the functionality, you know, the aesthetics did it meet our goals of the walk around to suit COVID-19. I understand that the Jasper Chamber of Commerce expects to have their report within a week.
Thank you for that. I do see hands from Councillor Wilson and Councillor Demota, but I also note that the representative of the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce, Patty Pavlov, has joined our meeting, and I will invite her if she wishes to speak to do so. Not to put you on the spot, but if you wish to address the issue, I notice that you have joined, so you're welcome to do that, Mrs. Pavlov. Otherwise, I will go to Councillor Wilson.
I think I
Mr.
saw
Mayor, I believe.
from
Yeah,
her.
go ahead, Scott.
And she has no audio on her computer, unfortunately.
Oh,
Yeah, she did send a note there that said that they're working on a presentation.
Well, in the meantime, may I?
yes, Councillor Wilson, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would definitely entertain seeing a presentation from Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce. I myself feel we don't need to see much from administration. I think we should operate as business as usual coming into the spring. Businesses have already put substantial money into the barricades that we approved last year. I wouldn't want to say, oh, that was 2020. We'd like to see it more like this in 2021. Businesses are struggling. This is assisting them. I think we run into the spring as per summer of 2020. We'll have the opportunity to then see what businesses do with additional time. They'll step up their patios, they'll step up their presence, and hopefully work with us and bylaw. But I think we give the go-ahead to businesses as soon as possible. I don't think we need a report. I don't think we need extra study. I think we move forward because we are going to be in COVID, and we do need to. We just need to plan ahead. Businesses need to plan ahead. Businesses need to budget. I think we make the call and we carry on as per last year. And sorry, further, Councilor McGrath, I do definitely agree with a committee that would work on larger items in the downtown core, but I just don't want to tie it to this. You know, I find that this is a pretty straightforward decision in the short term. I'm not tying us down for years to come. I think we should run into next year with what we got, and then we again work on other opportunities in the downtown core as suggested by you.
Councillor Demota and then Councillor Butler.
Thank you, and I agree with a lot of Councillor Wilson's sentiment. If you didn't see the notes coming through, Mrs. Pavlov is saying that they're working on it. They're going to be interviewing 174 businesses and to get some anecdotal information and suggestions. And I agree that it's a priority. And she's also offering to be part of a subcommittee if there is one struck. So to add to that, I fully agree. And I think the only thing that I would think helpful for council getting back information and you know, aside from a study and all that stuff, which I don't think is necessary. We've got a lot of information, but what were the pitfalls, you know, in starting up and some of the processes that we could put in place or have available that might make it easier for businesses to transition and what we've learned. You know, from some of the difficulties and what will make it easier for admin and bylaw as well to go forward if this was going to be enhanced, expanded, or you know, have more businesses fall into wanting to go down the same road. So a little bit of information like that might be helpful. What worked, what didn't work, what could some suggestions be to make it better for going forward for 2021 at least.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I agree that we need to do our best to anticipate what we will be faced with next spring, do our best to provide businesses with as much lead time as possible so that they're not under the kind of time pressure we've all felt we were under last year. And I think it's fair to anticipate that we are likely to find ourselves in much the same situation next year, even under next summer, even under the best case scenario. Even if if there's a vaccine, it won't have become general by that time. So I agree that it probably makes sense to give consideration to extending what we did this year into next season. I think we should receive a report from the Chamber of Commerce. I'm particularly happy to hear that they plan to contact a large number of businesses for input, because I don't want to see a report that is really based on the obviously very positive experiences of those who did make the change. We need to consider the impacts on those who didn't, and in particular, those who were unable to make the change. But that being said, let's set a timeline to receive that report, and let's also set a timeline to receive direct communications, say 2 or 3 or 4 weeks from now, to receive direct communications if any individuals or businesses prefer to communicate directly with council, and then I think we should make a decision. My only hesitancy is I think we need to be very clear that if we choose to go ahead again next year, I wouldn't be averse to that, even though I wasn't particularly in favor of what we did, but I see the benefits of it. And if it worked this year, and if we think we're facing the same issues again next year, we should go ahead. But I think we should be very cautious about doing anything that sort of sets tone that this would become anything like a permanent change in the community. Because if we were to do that, I think we have to have much broader conversations around private and commercial use of public space and costs there too, and broad community impacts. So as long as the conversation is around mitigations and abatements in COVID circumstances, then I'm certainly happy to make a decision sooner rather than later, so people know where we're going. And maybe those who found it wasn't cost effective for them to make the change on short notice last year would then have an opportunity to consider whether they would do it next year. And I don't think any of that really requires a committee. I think it's a council decision, and we can be in a position to make that decision a few short weeks from now.
Councillor McGrath.
Well, is this a council decision or is this a PDAC decision? Because from what I'm hearing from Mr. Greathead, regardless of what council decides, this still has to go to PDAC. So I think that if that's the case, then, and council is in support of this, and we decide perhaps formally through a motion that we are in support of continuing on next summer in the fashion that we did this summer, that we should start that process as soon as possible, because as Mr. Greathead explained, it could take a lengthy amount of time at the PDAC table.
Mr. Greathead, are you able to respond?
Yes, Your Worship. Councillor McGrath is right. This is going to have to go to PDAC for approval. And I will, I will just say administratively, as many people as council has been informed we're in support, the boots on the ground, we heard it quite the opposite. There was that. I just don't know how we're going to capture that, if we're relying on if we're relying on the report from JPCC to bring this forward to set the soul. That's kind of where I was looking for to make sure that we have the balanced approach before we get to PDAC, so it's not a holdup. So I think maybe possibly we've had this on the agenda. It's people are aware. I see that both of our local papers are involved. So maybe there'll be some uptake on this and some relevant information.
I'm sorry, Mr. Greathead. I might need you to explain one of the comments that I perhaps didn't hear clearly about having heard the exact opposite. And so who else might contribute to a fuller understanding of the issue other than the report that would be anticipated from the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce?
I would like to include AHS then, if we're going to go this route. The original design proposed by administration was that the allowance would be for occupation of the sidewalk, and instead of having seating in the parking lanes, the walkarounds would be built to maintain that spacing and the social distancing, as opposed to a walk through where there was patrons on the patio, the narrow walkway, and then another sidewalk seating. So that's just a concern that was brought up repeatedly to operations. And that's something that, I think that should be captured somehow in a review.
Yes, thank you for that. And that is, I think our desire is to get an objective review, not an entirely subjective review. So I saw on another message from Mrs. Pavlov that she would anticipate having a report from the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce by our next meeting, which will be the 17th of November. I don't know whether we want to see that report first and see whether it appears balanced, or should we now look for other sources of input so that we are better prepared to make a timely decision. I share the view, I think supported by Councillor Butler, that sooner would be better. I would target, if we could, perhaps our second meeting in December as the latest. I would like to be able to resolve this for the community. And although I might be prepared to make a decision on principle, I think it is important that we understand the practical implications of what happened this previous year, so we can adapt as necessary. But those adaptations cannot come just as having been divined by council. We have to get some sort of report to better understand exactly what the ramifications were. But sooner would certainly be better. So we are waiting for one report now. If there was, I think, also through the business walk coordinated by Community Futures, that question was asked. I haven't yet seen responses to that, but that is something that we can track as well and get that information before council, I think. I'm sorry, now I think that I saw Councillor Wilson with his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, my question was to Mr. Greathead. I'm a bit confused though, because you're suggesting Alberta Health Safety had issues with it, but if there's any health safety, life safety issues, that wouldn't have been approved in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, or building code infractions or anything like that. So like, it passed all of those this year. So I'm concerned because we moved from sidewalk seating to parking lane seating, which we all approved throughout the spring of 2020. They went through the appropriate inspections and etc. So I wouldn't think that Alberta Health Safety, HS, would have issue now, would they?
No, like I said, in operations, like we would be getting a bulk of the phone calls or the concerns, complaints about the sidewalk. So, you know, that is absolutely anecdotal. But having said that, you know, some of our sidewalks didn't have a sufficient buffering, you know, but seeing as we had made other mitigating changes, like masking in the central business district mandatory, you know, that reduced the concern to a degree. So it was a moving target that we ended up hitting on this one. But you know, I would just encourage a more wholesome discussion. So I can reach out to AHS and have this reviewed yet again and see if they have any concerns, or if that's something that needs to be brought to the table. That's kind of just this question here is, how do you want the review to go forward?
Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I appreciate all the conversation around this, and you know, even accepting what we went with for 2021, there was some talk with from other councillors in the springtime about an expanded version of what we had, and I think even going forward with understanding PDAC and Parks Canada, that there was the belief that this was going to be a one-off thing, and even though we want to review it, we're going to have some, you know, some concerns going forward with what we have. And if parking does become an issue, I do want to at least revisit, you know, that concept of maybe entertaining one of the lanes on one side of Connaught, just in discussion. And I think if that has to be at a different level, and maybe involving the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce and maybe other businesses like stakeholders or other members of the community, as well as council in those discussions. I'd like to have a broader conversation on it. And if there is a committee that needs to be struck for that, or if council wants to entertain a bigger discussion, or maybe conduct some sort of town hall, some type of public engagement, I think would be good, just to get some feedback. And I think just looking at a broader picture of what we had to make it better. So I do want to maybe be proactive in what we might anticipate at some of the concerns that PDAC and or Parks Canada might have going forward, because I do believe that it was kind of loosely understood that this was a one-off for 2020. And I think in order for us to make it work for the benefit of the entire community, or at least all the businesses, as many businesses as possible, for 2021, that we need to have a broader conversation and a broader look at what could work better from what we had.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau.
Thank you. I think we all agree that the program was generally a success. We have to keep that in mind, that it's probably a new thing in Jasper that will likely remain with us. I was especially pleased to see how well our administration worked with businesses in developing this, in spite of the fact that they had an initial conceptual design, but businesses worked, they work with businesses to change it. And when they first started, all those concrete pillars or concrete pieces of material, it looked quite unappealing. And as a matter of fact, comment that bunker was made and so on and so forth. But once a little bit of color was added and all the features were added, I think it was a great success. I think the businesses that could not participate, that were in the vicinity, they also benefit from the extra traffic that was generated in there. So I think we should be looking at that as something more of a ongoing thing. I won't say permanent, but ongoing thing. And it just solidifies to me how our administration was able to work with the businesses in developing a pretty good product. Thank you.
Thank you. From my perspective, in order to make a decision, I know that I will benefit from hearing many other perspectives. One of those is the operational perspective. So from my standpoint, Mr. Greathead, I would very much like to hear from administration about the operational perspective. And that would include the feedback that you received, whether from residents, visitors, or businesses in the community. And even if it's just anecdotal, some sort of report from operations about the situation, I think would be helpful, again, from my perspective. I will benefit from the perspective of commercial operators, but that comes with a caveat that I don't expect there to be a single perspective from the business side. There will be various perspectives, but if we can get those before us, that would be useful. And of course, there's the perspective of our residents who are not necessarily engaged in any commercial activity, but use our public sidewalks. And it's possible that we could have some sort of formal engagement, but time is limited. And so I use an opportunity like this to invite residents to give us their opinion about whether that enhanced sidewalk seating was beneficial or not. And once we get all of those perspectives, it's up to council to make a determination. And I would really encourage all those groups or individuals to get us their perspectives in short order if they can. I would like to make the decision, as I say, by mid-December, so that businesses can be better prepared if they get the opportunity to go ahead next year, to do so with planning and enhancement of their opportunities and the presentation to the community. I agree with Councillor Journeau that they did, I thought, a wonderful job creating silk purses out of sow's ears in short order. With more time and an ability to budget and prepare, I think they could put a really phenomenal product on our sidewalks and on our streets. But we have to give them the benefit of some time. So sooner would be better. So Mr. Greathead, after that long harangue, could we get a report from administration about the challenges and the feedback that you received over the summer related to this program?
Yes, that's easily done, sir. I can reach out to AHS as well, to see if they have any further concerns. I believe that you have made the call to public engagement for our residents. And I feel that we can come together and do a decent review and debrief of this within your timelines of mid to early to mid December.
Well, that of course was only my take on it. So before you go out to prepare reports, there should be direction from council, not from a single member of council. But I know benefit from a report from administration. Are there others in agreement? Councillors all nod or have thumbs up? Perfect. So you have that direction, yes. Mr. Greathead. And then I would suggest that we have this matter back on our agenda 2 weeks hence, and it sounds like we should have a report from the Chamber of Commerce by then.
Yes, Your Worship, that's what they're indicating right now.
Thank you. Anything else then at this time related to agenda item 6.2?
No, not for me. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for getting that on our agenda, Mr. Greathead. It is timely and topical. Appreciate the verbal report and the discussion, and we will come back to this on November 17, I guess it is. All right, thank you. We have now been underway. We're approaching 2 hours, so for the comforts and convenience of everyone, I will call a brief recess. I will call us back to order at 3:25. We have bare quorum, but I would like to see Councillor Wilson and Councillor Butler return. There's Councillor Butler. Thank you. And Councillor Wilson. I will assume that the rest are there. I can see snowmen in screens. All right, we will resume. We are at agenda item 7, bylaws. There are no bylaws for consideration today, which takes us to agenda item 8.1, COVID-19 tax and utility deferral update. And I am assuming Mrs. Melanchuk will lead that discussion.
Yes, Your Worship, thank you very much. So I'm just bringing back this report as an update prior to going into budget discussions. It was brought up by Councillor Wilson at a last meeting, and it wasn't direction, but I felt like it was very important to bring back at this time so that council could see where things were at. So as it was before, I left the stats on for comparison in July versus September on their payment dates, and also what was outstanding for utilities at July 29th. And as you can see, for outstanding taxes and utilities at this point, we're 2% compared to 2% last year and 6% compared to 6% last year. So we're right on par with where we were outstanding for the prior year. And also to note is that the utilities levied has closed a bit of the gap from 178,000 down to about 83,000 of a difference from the prior year. So just thought that was something to note as well. And so things are looking fairly consistent for 2020, considering all that has been going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Melanchuk. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mrs. Melanchuk. I'm still left with a question that I was asking last time we looked at this. I understand that these amounts are outstanding, but are they overdue, or are they just outstanding because they're on a payment plan and have simply not yet been paid? Or is there some of each of those cases in these numbers that we have?
Sorry, Your Worship, through to Councillor Butler. I was able to find the report that actually eliminated the any of the, as you can see up above where we did the comparison in July to September.
Yes.
In the next one that I did on November 3rd, I was able to find a report that brought it to numbers that didn't have the pre-authorized payments within them. So as you can see, they are exactly these amounts due. And so the pre-authorized are not included in these figures that I've presented.
Great, that's all I needed to understand. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Mrs. Melanchuk? Mrs. Melanchuk, from me then, the numbers, particularly for taxes, are relatively low. But even at those low numbers, is there a differentiation between percentages for residential and non-residential? And that is to say, are they both at about 2%, or is 2% an average of 4% and almost nil?
I did not break those apart on this report. I can do it for the next if I, it wouldn't take a lot of work to bring it back.
Okay. I only ask because the reason that we've requested this information is to see whether we can draw any inferences about ability to pay primarily. And it appears that people have been paying their taxes and their utilities in equal proportions as they were last year. But it might be interesting, at least for me, to know whether there is any even small difference between the ability of residential taxpayers as compared to non-residential taxpayers to pay. But the amounts are so small. I don't want to encourage you to do work for nothing if it's very much work. If council had an interest, they can signify that. But that I am only trying to get the most information I can from what you provide us and draw whatever conclusions are available to be drawn from it. As I say, it's not going to be large in any event, but if council has an interest, you might be able to divide that between residential and non-residential.
Yes, I sure can, if the will of council.
And is it the will of council? I see 3, 4 nods. All right, well, don't spend very much time on it, but if it's an easy calculation, I would certainly appreciate it. So thank you.
No problem. I'll bring that back to the next meeting.
That takes us to agenda item 9.1. Coming to us again as request for a decision on the 2021 tax requisition. And Mrs. Melanchuk, I presume that is still in your wheelhouse.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So today we are bringing a request for decision on the municipal tax requisition. So we are looking that council might be able to set a target municipal dollar or percentage, whatever council should choose for the 2021 budget year. And as a reminder that this target is not final, it doesn't eliminate the process of the full approval of the 21 operating budget and associated municipal taxation going forward. It would just give a basis for administration to work from. And also attached to this document is the 21 service levels document, and it's based off of the 2019 service levels provided. given the figures that are given to administration to work towards, they might be a valuable tool to look at the services provided within our community. And that council also determine a date that council might feel comfortable with for making a decision for the 2021 operating budget. In general, there might be a need for calling an additional committee of the whole to discuss service levels if needed, and or adjusting the upcoming public budget presentations to allow for sufficient time to put all the information together based on what is discussed over the meeting today. And that being said, there's the tax funded expenses that we have been speaking about for a couple of meetings now. And in 2019, the tax requisition for the municipal portion only was 7.9 million. And in 2020, due to the pandemic, we brought that requisition down to 7 million. And for discussion's sake, we have also brought back the 2019 service levels plus any fixed or non-discretionary costs that we have to look at going forward, given that we've had 2 years of increases in, say, utilities, insurance, and whatnot. And then there's figure number 2, which is representative of the 2019 service levels, plus those fixed or non-discretional fee increases, as well as what recommendations are being made by administration to provide those service levels at what the directors and managers feel is required to provide those services going forward. So those are the numbers that are on the table for discussion. And from here, administration might be able to then go work on the budget presentation for public going forward and for more discussion and deliberation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Melanchuk. Questions, comments from councillors? Councillor Demota?
Well, I was just wondering what the desire is for today with the presentation in front of us. Are we going to walk through this by department or just start talking generally off the bat and then move forward? I do have a few concerns and questions, but I don't want to overstep if we're going to be going in a systematic order of some sort.
Well, thank you for that. I'm not entirely sure how to respond. I think that at the end of today's session, administration would like, well, what they've requested is a decision. I repeat comments I made last occasion that I'm more comfortable giving direction, but I think it's absolutely vital that council understand what it is that they're making their decision or direction based upon. So if you have questions, I invite you to ask them now, because by the end of this session, hopefully we will have given clear direction to staff to move forward. And I would rather not have that come back and a councillor say, well, I wouldn't have done that had I understood better the material before me. So ask whatever questions you think are appropriate, Councillor Demota.
Well, more of a statement than a question, and I'm more on your side of moving forward and giving direction as opposed to a decision today, because I think that even though it came late into the process, that the application of some of that most funding and just seeing the impact of what is current and what the possibilities are of maybe relieving some tax burden on the residents going forward, because we did make the commitment of understanding that what we did for 2020 was a one-off, and and yourself, I will acknowledge that you wanted to wait a little bit in the fall to see if the province or the feds were going to give some funding, and although it didn't come early enough, but here it is. So we have to make some big decisions going forward, and some of the decisions we've already made for 2020 are going to have an impact on the years to come. So I want to look at a more in-depth scope on how we can use that money to alleviate some of the burdens that are coming forward. So I appreciate what's on the table and all the work that's put into it. And I appreciate the fact that we wanted to get an earlier start on this, and I'm glad we did. But with the new information that we have, I find it hard or more difficult to go forward, knowing that we have the potential of using $3.3 million worth of grants or funding to help us through the pandemic and coming out of it. So that's where I'll start. And then if we discuss specific departments, I'll contribute what my thoughts are in some areas. So thank you.
Councillor Butler.
Well, I take Councillor Demota's point that there's a wild card in the mix, which is the most funding. The problem with trying to factor the most funding into the decisions we need to make is that we will still be talking about application of the most funding in April, because most funding applies between now and the end of March. I also will not be surprised, well, I don't want to pretend I have a crystal ball, but I will not be at all surprised if the Alberta government were to extend the period of time over which that most funding could be applied. So if we wait to factor in the most funding into the decision we have to make, we will be talking at election time about this budget, and we can't do that. In the end, and I've made this point several times, but I'll repeat it in the end, in this very sensitive economic environment, I feel like the decision we need to make as to the size of the tax envelope really will come down in the end to palatability of the community and our sense of that palatability and acceptance of a tax rate. And I think therefore in this year, it's quite appropriate to determine a number first. And I think it's also really important to remember too, Councillor Demota's point about, going through a long process to come up with a number, is that no budget for any year exists. No budget really is a one-off. We will in the end have to choose a number for a tax requisition. And then we, as responsible councillors, need to go through a process to try to ensure that we have reduced expenses as much as we can within that envelope. And honestly, what's left over is reserves, and it's there next year. So we can go through a very deep process of analyzing how we think the most funding might affect this budget. And then we will, in the end, say, what should the number be? So I think we should begin there. And I'd like to point out that administration has given us three really clear and really helpful benchmark numbers to consider. Really, they've said, here's three sort of ballpark numbers. One is, if you think the best we can manage would be the 2019 tax requisition, well, we're going to fall short, and we're going to have some hard conversations about service reductions. And then number two, level two, they've said, well, here's what we think a maintenance budget would look like. Relative to 2019, a maintenance budget with simply unavoidable increases, basically inflation increases added. And then thirdly, they've said, here's what a 2019 budget really honestly operated to best practices, the way we think that those services should be delivered would look like. And I think that's a really good place to start the conversation. And I think we should press forward and leave administration, if we possibly can today, with a number so that we can complete this conversation. I probably have more to say, but that's my feeling for the moment.
I see your hand, Councillor Demota, but I did want to respond to your earlier comments and to Councillor Butler's. And I agree that I would like to leave today's meeting with a target for administration. As I said before, I would, if it was my motion, change it to say that council direct administration to prepare for council's consideration, a budget for the 2021 tax year with a municipal tax requisition of some amount to be sorted out, but a direction in that sense. But my view is that that number should be toward the higher end of the options presented by administration to date. And I say that because I am trying to be consistent with the arguments I had in the spring, where I wanted to maintain a budget level in anticipation that somewhere down the road, there might be what has now come across as most funding. And I agree with Councillor Butler that I think it is fair to prophesize that in the spring or for 2021, there might be an extension or a renewal of assistance for municipalities in the form of another allocation of funds. So what we have now that we don't really understand and can't get a handle on is funding for 2020. I think it's reasonable to assume that that might be repeated. And for that reason, I think we should try and rectify our budget, get it back to pre-COVID norms earlier rather than later. I agree that it is to some extent the palatability of the tax increase that matters, but it is also going to be, if it comes to this, the palatability of service reductions. And we have to face both of those, I think. So I would like to give a direction leaving today with an amount. And I think that it's the 8.4 or above, somewhere between 8.4 and 9.1. But that, of course, is why we are here to debate, and there are 7 of us. Councillor Demota, I cut you off first, and then I will return to Councillor Butler.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate some of the rebuttal from Councillor Butler. And I'm more now into considering what you were proposing last spring, and because of what's come forward, and I think it's prudent to plan properly. And so, you know, I'm also going to go back to what I was proposing last spring and looking at the overall budget and the departments separately and coming up with a number that I think that would be more reflective of what could roll out for a tax requisition, as opposed to working with that number and then rolling backwards. But your suggestion of setting a target as opposed to writing a number in stone is a little bit more appropriate, or I'm more amiable to work with that. Because I think, for an example, part of the discussion I wanted to have was some of the conversation that operations was presenting and adding to some of the workforce in the sense of a plumber or some other designation, and what that means to the community, right? So what are the cost benefits to do that? But what are the residual effects of, you know, not going to contractors, which, you know, have businesses in the community? We've been promoting the fact that support local. And then if we go and start, you know, filling in some of those trades within the municipality, we also have to consider the union wages that are going to be involved with that. You know, the benefits involved with that. If we getting new tradespeople, you're going to need vehicles, specific vehicles for them. So that might be upgrading our fleet or adding to the fleet. And then all those maintenance costs, phones, and then all the materials and supplies that you might need to have a plumber or another tradesperson on board. So, you know, it's great to say, well, this is only going to cost us this if we add this person here, but there's all these residual effects. And then what are we doing to those tradespeople in the community that we're contracting, that are providing, you know, income and jobs and, using their money in the community. So if we're taking away from them to add to ours, I think there might be a greater cost to the community in that regard. We have to consider those things. So when we talk about hitting that 8 point something or 9 point something, you know, are those real things that we want to do right now? So that's why I want to look at some of the stuff internally, like I did last year, so that we're not just setting a number and then trying to retract back and how do we make that work. But if it's a target, I'm willing to work with that.
Councillor Butler and then Councillor McGrath.
I'd just like to clarify a couple of my comments. And the first was relative to the most funding and to Mayor Ireland's comments. I was not actually intending to suggest that there might be more funding coming next year. The point I was making is the funding we have been allocated and funding which I think we are going to be challenged to take advantage of. The strings are very tight on that funding. That is essentially intended to be used as replacement income. So the $3-some million amount is going to be challenging to take advantage of. But the point I was making is that that funding allocation is to be used to replace lost income or increased expenses between essentially the beginning of COVID and the 31st of March. So it goes into what is for us another budget year. And even that means it's extremely difficult for us to factor that in right now. So it wasn't that I was sort of holding my breath hoping that there might be more funding. I anticipated that the provincial government, since COVID doesn't seem to be going away, may move that window of opportunity to use the allocation further into next year. And then I wanted to make a comment about the target, and I've never been advocating for any kind of a hard number. The number will only become the actual tax requisition when we pass the budget, and in fact, actually when we pass the tax bylaw. But I do feel that if we don't have a number to work to, we will be talking about plumbers and electricians, and I just can't imagine what between now and March, and we will not get there, and we have a responsibility to get there. So no, of course it's not a hard number. It's not a hard number until we pass a budget.
Thank you, Councillor Butler, and I apologize if it appeared that I was crediting you for things that you did not say or putting words in your mouth. That was not my intent.
No, I know, Your Worship, and sorry to jump in, but I just felt it was really important because I feel like a lot of people are paying attention to what we say here, and I would hate to think that there was an impression formed that council was forming its budget on the sort of hope that we might get some more money down the road. So that's the only reason I felt maybe we should.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'd like to express my content with agreeing to a direction that administration prepare a budget for consideration of councils that's around that $8.4 million mark as in figure 1 for 2021, recognizing that it's about $700,000 shy of figure 2, which is requesting $9.1 million. Though I fully respect and acknowledge administration's request for the additional funds of about $700,000, I just don't know if this is the year to implement huge staffing changes, and I hope that we would be able to formulate a plan on how to get there in future years, but I don't necessarily know if this is the year to do that.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. Councillor Wilson.
Sorry about that. I'll be short, but I too support something in the range between 8.4 and 9.1, and I think we find a happy medium there because, you know, the 2021 figure 1, so 2019 plus fixed or non-discretionary increases, is pretty limited, and I think we should give administration some type of flexibility for unforeseen or requests, director requests that almost need to happen this year that just aren't immediate at this point, but may occur in 2021. So I would support something more along the lines of 8.8. And again, this is not a hard number, but that's what I would make a motion for that, and I'd get behind that, because I just find that, yes, I definitely don't support service reductions at this point. I think we're in this for the long haul. You're kind of 2 or 3 years to come. So I don't want to be scratching our way back every year. I find that I feel we should swing back somewhat drastically, unfortunately, and start trying to plan for the future.
Did I hear in there a motion?
I won't make that motion until everybody's spoken. I think
Okay.
Paul, like he wants to speak.
Yes, Councillor Butler.
So several meetings ago, thank you, Your Worship, several meetings ago, I expressed the opinion that we should accept administration's recommendation that we develop the budget starting with a number for the tax requisition. And I also said I would make that motion. I said at the time I would make a motion, would offer a motion. And please, it's important to understand that my intent was primarily to make a motion for discussion purposes, because I take the view that if we don't have a motion, we don't have a target, we'll never complete the conversation. So at that time I said I would make a motion for a number around the 2019 tax requisition number. And that is a number I could be content with. Because of the fairly conservative point of view I take here. However, that wouldn't pass. It's clear to me, and fair enough. But because I said I would provide a motion, I will make a motion now to set the tax requisition at what we have come to call option level 2, or it's figure 1 in our package. And so I will move that council direct administration to prepare a budget for council consideration with a tax requisition of $8,429,903 million. Before I put a full stop period on that, I'm making that motion with that particular wording, partly Mr. Ireland, Mayor Ireland, so that you find yourself satisfied with the fact that what we're doing is setting a target and not a hard number. And does that correlate with what you expressed a few minutes ago, the sort of motion you would think would be best?
Yes, thank you. I think it replicates all but identifying the tax year. So for the 2021 tax year.
Yeah. And so I will read it again. Be it resolved, the council direct administration to prepare a budget for council consideration with a tax requisition of $8,429,903 million for the 2021 budget year.
All right, thank you, Councillor Butler. That is the motion. Councillor Demota, you wish to speak to that motion?
Yeah, just I'd like some clarification from Councillor Wilson. Like, just because I added both numbers of the figure 1 and figure 2 together and divided by 2, is that kind of where you're kind of trying to get a happy medium there to the 8.8?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't do the math, Councillor Demota, and I would definitely get behind Councillor Butler's motion at this point, as it is a target. If directors feel they need to request further items, and it's flexible, and if they can find savings, it's flexible. Like, we don't have to hit 8.4. It could be 8 million, it could be 9 million, but it's close. We're shooting for 8.4 and change, and I would get behind that.
I agree. And I like the fact that there is a motion on the table for a number. I was honestly aiming for something a little bit higher if we were going to do that today, and just because of we've seen that we've always been running lean, and from the steps that the measures that we've collectively taken over the summertime and saw what running lean looked like and what it meant to running lean before, and some of the gaps that we have within our operations overall are quite glaring, and the ones that might have been on the bubble are certainly needed some addressing. So regardless if we have potential funding coming up in the future, I think there's an important thing to look at what we're contributing to reserves. And I know that for 2020, we drew a little bit back, even though we still contributed. We're not putting away as much as we would have wanted to. And I think that it's important to look at that, even in the economic times that we're in. We do need to consider running conservatively, but at the same time, not draw ourselves short for hurting or hindering us going down the road. So I appreciate that 8.4, and if that's just a target, then I'm willing to work with that. I was kind of entertaining more your thought on 8.8, but so the conversation goes. Thanks for giving me the time to talk.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. And I'm going to take this opportunity to fill in as the mover my views of why that's an appropriate ballpark number to look at, and then probably have a little more to say. I think it's really important to recognize that no matter where we set the tax requisition and the resulting tax bill that our residents will get, that we are in of necessity, a very tight economic environment right now. And I think we have a responsibility to think really closely about some of the difficult decisions around service levels. Councillor Demota expressed the view that he thinks we run really lean. And I think that to some extent that is true. I think there are areas where we run lean, particularly around maintenance of our facilities and our infrastructure. My motivation for choosing a lower number is because I have to be honest, I fear our lack of resolve and willingness as a council to make the tough decisions around where we direct our financial resources. We have major problems under the ground, to be perfectly frank. We have a leaky system. We have grave difficulties with water, with wastewater, with paving, and these kind of things. These are the least entertaining, interesting areas to deal with, but they are the most at the core of what municipal governments need to be doing. And one of my real fears in even going with that middle number is that we all of us collectively, administration and council, will sort of take a sigh of relief in their say, there, we can have everything we had in 2019, all those services, and we can carry on. And one of the problems that we have, I think, all recognized in our budget process is that we just do too much carrying on with doing everything the way we have done before, and small incremental increases to the budget, and not facing sometimes where we have tough decisions to make. So we run lean in some areas, but I think our budget as a community directs a lot of money to, I won't say unessential services, but they are soft services. We have, for example, in the hugely important area of culture and recreation, we have a low recovery in terms of what we recover to the budget in user fees. And I think it's something we have to face and do something about it. I grant that doing something about that in this environment right now with COVID is a tough one, but I think we have to face those issues. And we direct a lot of money to areas where many municipal governments just recognize that maybe they really ought not to be involved, because municipal governments need to deal with the core services. So my great fear is that we're not going to be willing to have those conversations, because we're going to say, okay, well, that's the budget we need to just sort of carry on. And that conversations about expense reductions will fall off the table. So I hope that doesn't happen. But I can clearly see that passing a tax requisition at the 2019 level isn't going to fly. So in that spirit, I'm putting this forward, but I think we have a responsibility to engage in priority-driven budget conversations that really make an honest effort to consider where are the areas of priority for our government in an environment where we can't have everything that we want always. And I hope that we will be willing to have that conversation and not assume that just because we picked a number, that then we're going to just leave the rest to administration to build out a budget, as they should be prepared to do, without asking some of those hard questions around service delivery, because we have asked for and received a lot of really good information to help us through some of those department by department and service by service conversations. So thank you for allowing me to go on at some length, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Although that did sound like closing argument, closing the debate, not everybody has had an opportunity to speak, so I will.
It was
allow
meant
that
to be opening,
yeah, fair
and
enough.
not closing.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other comments? All right, I will say that I will vote in favor of that motion. And although I indicated earlier that I might have been inclined to go higher, I have really appreciated this discussion. It is the nature of debate that occasionally drives decision-making in ways that you didn't expect. And I accept that setting the budget at, or at least the target at that level, effectively confirms a 0% increase from 2019 with the fixed cost increase, but a 0%. And all the rest of it, although I might favor additional funds, all the rest of that is quite rightly subject to further council debate and consideration. And so although this motion directs administration to prepare a budget with a target, we recognize, all of us, that it is just a target. When we come to approve the budget, we may have arguments to go up or to go down. And that is all legitimate. And so I look forward to those continued discussions in a fairly short timeline so we can get to the end of this. But I do agree that we need a starting point. Administration has implored us to give them a starting point. I think we should accede to that request. And I agree that this is a very reasonable starting point. And I will therefore vote in favor of the motion. Councillor Journeau, I saw your hand, and then Councillor Demota.
Yes, I appreciate all the discussion and support the commentary. I will support this motion as presented today. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank you, and thank you for the extra time again, and I appreciate the discussion and particularly the points that Councillor Butler made, and address some of the fears and maybe concerns that I had, and I'm comfortable, and you know, some of you might consider me a consummate fence sitter, but you know, I'll even, you know, own that and saying that if I'm weighing and considering what's good for the entire community versus, you know, sometimes having to take some hard decisions, if I can get a compelling argument, and the points that Councillor Butler brought forward after I spoke in kind of in a bit of a rebuttal there, I'm convinced to go in that direction, and thank you for making me feel more comfortable with starting at that number for a target. So I appreciate the thought behind that and the work that you did to come up with that. So I'm okay. I'm also in favor of going in that direction.
Thank you. Councillor McGrath, I'm not sure whether I saw your hand, but I don't want to ignore you if I missed that. All right, no. All right, Councillor Butler, you do have an opportunity to close debate if you wish.
I think I've said all I want to say. I'm sorry to disappoint you all.
All right, I will call the question. I will read it again just for the benefit of administration. If there are any questions from administration about the motion, I am watching my screen to see Mike's unmuted. The motion, as I understood it, is that the motion from Councillor Butler is that council direct administration to prepare for council consideration a budget with a municipal tax requisition of $8.429903 million for the 2021 budget year. I see nothing that indicates anybody has any serious questions about that, so I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So thank you all, and thank you to administration for getting us to this point. If I may now ask of administration, with that direction to prepare a budget with that tax requisition amount, I presume that that is pretty much prepared. Are we then able to continue with the previous plan of scheduling public budget meetings beginning next week, or have we missed any window of opportunity to roll that out as we had planned almost a year ago? Mr. Greathead, can you address?
Your worship, I would have to defer to Ms. Malinchuk and ask her input on this one. I don't see from mute on her mic unmuted at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. So this all being said, the number is there, and we can work forward from this. However, given that the presentation was scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday of next week, and that we still should be talking about the utilities, and that is coming next week, I was wondering if council might prefer to keep that date open until we have the utilities conversation at next week's meeting. I just putting it through as a suggestion. I am willing to do whatever I need to do to make it happen for next week if absolutely mandated by council. However, as alluded to by Councillor Butler, we have a lot of core municipal services that still need to have conversations as well. And given that there's those conversations to be had, might be beneficial to have a little bit of just discussion on those before going into those public meetings.
All right, well, that is a reasonable approach, and perhaps I advanced the agenda a little too quickly. I was hoping that with an answer to that, it would make the next question easier for council. That is setting a target date to conclude this budget process. But let's turn to that now, because that's the second part of the request for decision, which is before us, to give some direction with respect to timing. And maybe if we set that first, then we can work backwards and decide what is appropriate timing for public meetings and the necessary council meetings to consider details within departments. So the report that is before us, the request for decision, just has a blank that we determine blank date as the final decision date for the 2021 operating budget. Again, as I said, I think a couple of weeks ago, I would prefer that to be again a direction because things may happen that postpone or delay it. And my thought as well is that it would be an opportunity for council to direct itself as well as administration. So I was thinking of wording in this nature, that council direct itself and administration to anticipate and strive to achieve a final decision approving the 2021 operating budget on, and then fill in the blank. And I think I had previously suggested December 15th, which would still be my optimum date. Gives us a little less than 6 weeks to move through this process, but that should be sufficient time, given that we already have today's number. But I leave that just for discussion with council and a motion if we can get one. Councillor McGrath.
I would move the motion that you just worded, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Councillor Butler.
That's fine. I was actually going to leap in and offer, if you wished to cede the chair, because this was a conversation that you initiated, I think, and if you had wanted to make the motion, but what's most important is that we have a motion.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not concerned to having my name attached to it. Not that I shy away from it, but I agree. We simply need the motion. So that is the motion before us, Councillor Demota.
No, I think it's good to have an early target like that. And I was just remembering back, I think it was my second year in the first term. You know, I had to be out of town at my wife's family's place for Christmas, and on December 23rd, we were having, I was calling in on a conference call to crunch numbers before 2 days before Christmas. So having the target of the 15th, I'm good for, but anybody that wants to put forward that motion, that's good. I can do that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Butler?
I'm certainly in support of the motion. I think if we can possibly have a budget passed before the end of the year, I think that would just be a great step forward, not just this year, but for council and the way the municipality operates. I have one thing I am concerned about is that we collectively as councillors are really thinking out front and asking questions that we may feel we need answers to in order to complete the process now, because we cannot be asking questions on December 1st to get the answer on the 15th and then think we're going to make a decision. We need ourselves to be really proactive. We need to read the materials that have been provided with our critical hats on. And I have a couple of questions. I'm happy to wait until after we pass this motion, but I wanted to make that point, that to Mayor Ireland's point, this is a motion for council. This is not a motion for administration. If we don't do our part, there's absolutely nothing administration can do to meet this target.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And that is why I did insert direct itself. So I will call the question in. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So we have a target for a tax requisition. We have a target for a decision date. So now it is incumbent on all of us to advance the process to meet the target date with a number somewhere defined by that target. Councillor Butler, you indicated that you then had questions concerning the budget itself.
Thank you. I have two questions that I am hoping to see an answer for. The first, I hope, is not too difficult, and it is for Mrs. Malinchuk, and it is not for answer today. But it's this, we talk about this as being an operational budget, and we've set the tax requisition, but I think it's important for us to understand and the community to understand that part of this budget is transfers to reserves, which makes it, of course, partly a capital budget. We tend to talk about the capital budget as what we talk about when administration comes to us and says, you know, can we build this or can we fix that? And we allocate some funds. But therefore, like to know if for next week, it's possible to have just a clear report or understanding or list of, with this tax requisition number, what the proposed transfer to reserves would be, ideally broken down department by department or reserve fund by reserve fund, so that we can clearly understand of the tax requisition what truly does go into the annual operations of the organization and what actually goes into capital reserves. And Mrs. Malinchuk, is that something you can offer? It's probably somewhere in the materials that we've received over the past 2 weeks, but I'm having trouble finding it.
Yes, that's not a problem.
Great, thanks very much. Then the question 2 is around part of that I have is part of the requests that were involved in the sort of the level 3 budget request, and it's from Mr. Greathead. One councillor referred to it earlier on. I believe there was a request to add a couple of positions, and I'd like clarity as to what they are. I've heard of an electrician and a plumber, and I've also heard that the spirit of the request is that we could therefore not as frequently have to call in contractors, but therefore the logical part of me says, well, therefore we should be able to see a commensurate decrease in whatever the line item is, what we pay to contractors. And I'm wondering if we can have a little more detail on how that would work. And I don't need the answer today, but I would sure like to have a little clearer understanding of what's involved in that piece of that request for next week.
Your worship, to the floor, we can work on this and try and show where the offsets would be from one section to the other. One of our biggest problems, so when we're asking for increased staffing, especially for tradesmen, these tradesmen don't build their careers waiting for Jasper, the municipality of Jasper, to call them up, right? They do have other work, they do have other projects. It's quite often it's contractor availability. And if we have a project that's going on, or we need a skilled trade in, whether it be an electrician, a plumber, and the coordination is quite often an effort, and it does drive up an awful lot of costs. Quite often, if something's on the go, we can't go local, so we're paying travel rate from Edmonton, Edson, wherever we need to go for some of these people. So tradesmen might be charging their full shop rate at $140 an hour, plus the day's travel and vehicle rental. So it does exponentially, just having that gap in our roster, it shows up and it's a very present thing. So I will try, I will work with Mr. Hutton, and we will try and show where we are going to actually have an improvement on this. Another position that we feel that we would be best served by is a health and safety officer corporately for the organization. There's just, the legislation has changed over the years, and there's an awful lot of time we're putting into that. And we would be better served with having a full-time dedicated person in that position.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Councillor Butler, did you wish to follow up?
Yeah, I would like to. Thank you. And partly just in the spirit of not putting him into more work than is needed to answer my question. I know that part of that request was for a health and safety officer, and I'm going to say that that has come to us in front of us several times. And it's an area where speaking for myself, I don't feel that I need a lot more background and context. I think the spirit of that ask is clear, and I also don't want to put you or anyone on back feet feeling defensive about the request with respect to electrician and plumber. I'm sure you understand that in the community, some would say, well, we have electricians and plumbers in town, and doesn't make more sense to use those. I'm entirely prepared to defend the question, if I can show that over the long term, it's more cost efficient and works better for the community and isn't going to be unduly detrimental to our tax-paying businesses. So I can tell by the way you answered the question that you understand where I'd be coming from, and I don't want to predispose my arguments. I just like to understand, I guess, be convinced with a little more detail of why that would be a change that would make sense for the community over the long term. Thanks.
Absolutely, sir. And it's budget time. We're municipal servants. We're used to this. This is what we live for. So it's we'll get it through.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Are there other questions now that administration might start preparing? Councillor Demota.
No, and I just wanted to thank Councillor Butler again, because those are some of the things that I wanted to address, and he expanded on some of the concerns that I had earlier. And going from what Mr. Greathead said, I don't think it's something that budget time is something that they live for, but maybe want to live to get through anyway. But I appreciate the info and the understanding that admin has of where we're going.
Thank you. I will just alert administration, and I presume Mrs. Melanchuk primarily, a question that may arise for me. Well, it depends on what we get in a week when we dive a little deeper into the utility rates. But it seems to me that there may be an impact on the operating budget depending on how we deal with the utility rate issue. And so the question that, if it's not answered in the presentation, the question that I will have is, what impact will a change in circumstance on the utility rate have on the overall budget? Because I assume that we're still going to be faced with expenses of running things, and if rates don't go up, what impact will that have? If it is only the question of transfers to reserves, that might be fine, but I will simply want to know if there is a connection between what we do on utility rates and the budget. And if there is none, that will be a simple answer as well. So I just say that now so that it might be part of the presentation and I can be informed without ever asking the question. Are there any other questions to leave with administration for today? So that takes me back then, I think, to the question of how we roll this out now that we have an end date in sight, December 15th. Today is the 3rd. We will meet again on the 10th. I think it's fair that council get the budget maybe before we take it to the public. So if there was a date on November the 9th, it seems premature, but I would like us to, if we can, kind of coordinate our steps moving forward when council will receive the formal budget presentation and when we will go to the public with it.
Your worship, I might answer that. I would suggest that we would be in a reasonably good spot to host the 2 evenings for the budget presentation on the 24th of November. So that would be a 2-week deferral from where we're sitting right now. That will also get us a chance to make the presentation for the utility rates that we need to discuss as well, and which will be coinciding with the budget. So if those dates are amenable to council, I think that we can make that happen.
Certainly sounds reasonable to me. Others, Councillor Demota?
Well, yeah, so we're talking about going from a two evening presentation, drawing back to one. Is that the idea? Because I think initially we had the 9th and 10th.
Sorry, I I would suggest that we do it over 2 days. It would be an awful lot to get through in a single evening.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. So I got confused there. I wasn't sure what the recommendation was, but I would appreciate that time too. I know it's right back where we were before, and we wanted to have this done a little earlier for the residents. But I'm comfortable with that. 23, 24 or 24, 25. Sorry.
I hate to be a stick in the mud. I
Go
have
ahead,
had these dates put in my calendar for many months and plan a lot around my calendar, but I can be flexible. The 24th of November is my 9-year-old's birthday, or my child is turning 9, and I would be in deep, deep trouble if I planned something for that night. And I certainly wouldn't want to miss the budget evening. But any other date in November other than the 24th of November, I would be very available and would move my schedule for.
We had, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we had the 9th and 10th penciled in. Is that correct? So if we advance those each 1 week instead of 2, would that allow sufficient time to get the other material? Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Ed. I don't mean to cut that suggestion off. It's an obvious option. I guess the point I wanted to raise is that part of this conversation is what is it that we present the public with? The earlier it is, the more undercooked the budget proposal will be in terms of it having been debated and considered by council, which is not necessarily inappropriate, because it's also not fair to put it in front of the public formally 1 week before decision day, because that makes it look, okay, we're not going to listen anyway. So, but I am concerned that a couple of weeks more beyond what we had said would be ideal. And I'd still rather see us somewhere toward the end of November than, or third week of November than, earlier, subject to what administration finds feasible. It is only ever a draft budget, of course, that is presented to public, but it might be helpful if we ourselves had more conversations before that date. It would help the public to understand where we think we may be going.
Well, surely we can find 2 dates toward the end of November that don't conflict. They don't have to be consecutive dates. It helps.
No, what about 23 and 25, say?
Councillor Demota?
I like Councillor McGrath have planned a lot of stuff already for November, because it is a slower month and time to take advantage of some extra time. So whatever happens, I will make time, and if I can't make it, then I'm really liking the progression that we're making here in the conversation that said, and I'm more comfortable in sitting with what council's talking about and where we want to go as a collective. So if I end up missing a night or two of this, or having to miss both of them, I'm very comfortable at the work we've done so far, and how we're actually working together to get these things done. So I have every faith that we're going to have some good outcomes. So I'm willing to work with whatever schedule works for everybody.
In terms of getting notice out, we probably don't need too much lead time. Is it feasible to wait until we hear the utilities presentation next week and then fix dates? We are running out of time, so if we have choices, but more notice is probably better for more people. So I'm quite prepared to pick some dates today, but I'd leave it to groupthink. Councillor Butler, you look like you're prepared to go back to the 23, 25?
I think people should turn their mics on and we should pick a couple of dates. 23, 25, that's Monday, Wednesday, 25th, 26th is Wednesday, Thursday. Is it possible that we can just pick dates here?
Yeah, I'm pretty open, except Thursday evenings are out for me.
So Monday, Wednesday?
They would work, yeah.
Councillor McGrath?
Thank you, and I apologize for throwing a wrench in the dates for everyone, and I appreciate the willingness to adjust things for me. I'm super happy to plan for the 23rd and the 25th if that works for the rest of council.
It's fine with me. I see hands up, although I don't want to foist dates on administration that are for any reason unachievable for reasons we don't understand. So I invite either Mrs. Malinchuk or Mr. Greathead or anyone else in our staff component to comment about whether or not public meetings on budget can be achieved on the 23rd and 25th of November. Mr. Greathead.
In the absence of any objections, I believe that we can make that happen, and I think we should book those.
All right, thank you. Things can, of course, change. It's more like direction than decision, but if they can be pre-booked and people can start making plans, that's excellent. So thank you for that. All right, that takes us then, I think, unless anybody has noted anything we've missed on that, that takes us to agenda item 9.2, World Tree request. Councillor McGrath.
Thank you for the opportunity to add this to the agenda today, and I must apologize because since I added it to the agenda on maybe Tuesday or Wednesday of last week, it's changed a little in my mind and what I have to present to council. So my original intention of bringing this forward was seeing a GoFundMe request or a GoFundMe page on social media for the World Tree to happen this year. And it left me feeling a little unsettled. I wouldn't use the word embarrassed, but it left me feeling unsettled for our community that we have to resort to a GoFundMe page being created for something like a World Tree in our community with such low fiscal requirements to make something like this happen. And with a little bit of man hours put in as far as efforts to bring something like this that brings so much community joy, I believe that this should be considered as a municipal operation and part of our regular municipal business versus something that 3 volunteers in the community are responsible for year in and year out. But then on Friday night, I attended a pumpkin walk at Centennial Park, and it was amazing. And the experience that I left with on Friday night, put on by volunteers, teenagers in the community, as well as staff at Community Outreach Services, I left that event feeling very inspired for more of it. And more opportunities to gather in a safe way throughout the winter months, specifically because we're dealing with COVID-19 right now and unsure of how to host gatherings and bring unity in our community throughout the colder months. So instead of requesting a decision to be made, I'm asking more or less for notice today to discuss this again at next week's meeting. And next week, I feel like I will have a little bit more put together. I'm possibly considering presenting council with a policy in which administration has to refer to when making decisions, and a policy that would more or less be along the lines of the municipality of Jasper is an equitable and engaged community with a priority of community health. The municipality strives to create outdoor opportunities for winter resident and visitor enjoyment. The COVID-19 pandemic has made gathering indoors high risk. Therefore, a social need is present in our community to have outdoor gathering spaces available for various community uses. More or less looking for administration to support and back the community and various user groups in the community at things such as a community tree, a world tree that might have a fire pit next to it and some chairs, possibly some fire pits at Centennial Park with some chairs, perhaps some really wonderful initiatives going on by various user groups and by our own organization in certain departments, having snowman building contests, possibly requesting that power might be needed at the Centennial Park building for some of these events to move forward, which of course would have some fiscal implications, and really allowing our community. I might even throw in ice surface for ice skating on my wish list of what I believe community engagement should look like this winter. But I'm hoping that I can encourage council to do what we need to do to form a policy or a statement or a request for direction for moving through this winter as supportive as possible for the wellness of the community.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. So we don't have to deal with waiver of notice. This is notice, and you're asking that it come back with further information at committee of the whole, and then we could make decision at the next regular meeting. Fine, thank you very much. Councillor Demota.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that approach. I really like the angle you're taking and how you're addressing it, and the insight into using existing policy and working with that. And it's way better than trying to work with a proclamation. So you really helped me look at a different way of things, and that could open up other ideas for future events in the community. So good on you. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you, Councillor McGrath. Any further discussion on that? We will get more information then next week. So that will be a time for discussion. So that takes us to agenda item 10, correspondence for information, consideration, and or action. We have 3 letters, all relating to the fitness center. Councillor Wilson.
Oh, geez, I was unmuted already. This is maybe just a question for Mr. Greathead to take to Mrs. McNabb. In regards to these letters, and then I guess in regards to operations or culture and rec operations in the 2021 year, will there be alterations in hours at the fitness center and the aquatic center? I think currently they're reduced due to the 2020 budget, but I would suspect that they would like mornings and like hours would be open back up in the morning come 2021, because currently the situation in my the pool, but also I think the fitness center is pretty dismal. We're not really offering a great service there at this point, in my opinion. So I just would like to find out what the plan is for January 1st and throughout the coming year, because the service reduction there is quite noticeable, and I don't think is a great setup at this point. And I don't think that we should be moving into the next year offering that same kind of service level.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead.
Your worship, to the floor. My understanding is that this year with the staffing reductions and that, when we understand that there was people that would go in very early in the morning and begin their workout, and then there was a significant lull in activity and in user participation, and then it would peak back up. So we were trying to do the staffing as minimally and pick the sliding window of when we would get the most bang for the buck and serve the most people. I'm unsure exactly of what the staffing request is for the budget. I can get back to you on that, but I believe that's what the intent is, to resume normal operation with the new budget going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Councillor Demota.
Thank you. Well, when we were making our decisions in the springtime, we did talk about putting money towards reserves, and we did talk about listening to the community and working with the demand on us opening our facilities up. We made a commitment to daycare, and we've seen that the demand isn't as high as some people wanted to or anticipated, and now we're seeing a request in some areas. And these are just people writing in. I've had a lot of feedback from people, speaking to them broadly in the community, and did discuss some of the constraints behind the fitness and aquatic center. So we made a commitment to listen to what the community was saying and to look at the demand. So I appreciate the fact that we've got to this point. And then considering that the province is maybe giving us some money, if we could structure some of that money that potentially is coming in to work with that and maybe slowly work with the demand that's there. And you know what, we might try a few things that might work good, and then we might learn some things that aren't working well, and we can cut back if we have to. But I think it's a matter of time and moving forward. I'm with Councillor Wilson. Some of the restraints that are there doesn't work for everybody. It might work for those time fluxes where we've had those higher demands, but if the staff is willing and we have the ability to start opening up with more hours and looking for the money elsewhere, I would say that maybe now is the time to really look at that. So, and I'm not what some may say, listening to specific user groups, but if there is a demand from the community of those members that are using that, then I think we should be listening to them.
Councillor Butler.
Two of these letters ask for one thing and one thing only, and that is they'd like to be able to work out for an hour and a half instead of an hour. And both of those letters say that they can't do it because council isn't letting them. And I don't accept that even a little bit. Something is very wrong if that is an impression that users have. Something is even more wrong if they're being told that. Council didn't set the hours for the facilities. Council didn't set how long people can go in. I think people in the community understand that we're working under constraints. Everyone wants more services. I want more services. I want longer hours. And we can go with what Councillor Wilson has suggested. We can go back to normal operating hours, but our user fee income is not going to be anything like what we have been used to in 2021. So the way we'll do that is by raising taxes. So we can do that. All it takes is passing a motion in council. But I want more services and more satisfaction for our users, but these things don't come at no cost. And I'll point out again that all two of these letter writers are asking is that they be allowed to go for an hour and a half instead of an hour. Surely there must be some solution that addresses those letters. It's a matter for administration and not a matter for council.
I will come back to that. Councillor Demota and Councillor Wilson.
Well, I won't rebut on that. Councillor Wilson had his hand up before me this time. I've been talking
Oh.
about, so I'm willing to. Yeah, sorry.
I apologize, and I should have asked the question when we were asking about when we were talking about budget. All I wanted to know was, are the hours going to represent what we've just endured, or are the hours going to represent what we have been accustomed to in 2019? I honestly not trying to pick any fights. I would just like to know what services are we getting with the requests from Culture and Rec. Of course, I've read those letters as well. I understand that that's not our, but they also have the opportunity to write a letter to council. And if they weren't tactful about it, well, that's, their prerogative. But there is a restriction on any type of use or any type of workout in Culture and Rec or in the fitness center currently. That is actually what is happening. And yeah, for sure, they can write us a letter and then it gets a bit more exposure, but they could also request that from the director as well. But my question only was directed towards what should we expect to see in 2021.
Your worship, to the question on the floor, my understanding is that the budget request going forward for 2020 will reflect the schedule and hours required or for that we had it in 2019. Now, my understanding with the 1 hour blocks for staff is just to make sure that since we have reduced availability, reduced operating hours, that we it was just deemed operationally to make sense that we have to cut the blocks so that way we can control the number of users that we have in there at any one time. I have taken note of this conversation and we'll be able to get back to you with some better information.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Councillor Demota, I know that I saw your hand, but you didn't see mine because I didn't put it up. But I did want to address that issue from two of the letter writers requesting additional time. And I agree entirely that it is an administrative decision, but I am not prepared to make any sort of judgment one way or another on the decisions that have been made. It seems to me that we have, as council, set a budget and administration has to work within that. So they have a window of opportunity. And there are a limited number of people, I think it's 10, but I could be wrong, that can be in the facility at any time. And so if there are 6 hours when it is open, we could potentially have 60 people that we serve. But if they go to an hour and a half, it's going to reduce the number of people who can be served in a day. And I trust that administration takes these sorts of things into account and makes decision. It is incorrect to say that council has in any way set the hours, but we have set the budget and administration has an obligation to try and provide services, I think, to as many people as they can. And because they're limited to the number of people that can be in there, that could well be the most imaginative and beneficial way to deal with it. So I'm not prepared to make any judgment about that. Maybe it can be worked out, but maybe that is the best solution. And I leave that to administration quite happily. And I also wanted to just quickly address this question about whether they were asked to submit letters and asked by whom. I don't want to assume that any of these pieces of correspondence were solicited by our staff. We encourage residents to have feedback through that feedback portal, and they are free to do that on their own volition. And so I don't like to leave a suggestion that somehow they have been put up to this by somebody. Staff, I think, are doing what we have empowered them to do through the budget and other processes. And if people want to say that they don't like the results, they're entitled to do that. But I don't read into that they were asked in any sense to do that, or that those views were solicited. So in defense of administration, I think it is a very difficult and challenging time to try and provide services in this reduced atmosphere with all of the other contingents. So I'm happy to have them report back if there's a way to address additional time. It's an administrative issue and they're free to do that, but I am not prepared to make any judgment about what they've done so far. I see Councillor Butler. Did I ignore anyone previously? Councillor Demota?
Yeah, no, not ignore me, but I appreciate that you acknowledge me. And I just want to say, in regards to some of the comments made, if unfortunately that people heard it was council's fault, or that's the reason why the times are restrained that way, you know, that's unfortunate. But I want to give staff the benefit of the doubt, because since the moment these discussions started, there's been stuff that's already been spun on social media by some residents, and you know, blaming council on certain things. So I think some of that conversation might have come out from people talking, and that's okay. Like, I mean, we're public figures, and we should be open to that. I'm also open to getting feedback. I'd like to have it as funneled as possible. So having that portal on our website is great. And you know, I do understand that some of these constraints are administrative decisions, but we've allowed that as a doorway for us to listen to the community. And this might start more letters coming in and for or against the arguments or you know, the request today. But again, we did make a commitment to the community that we would listen to them, and if the demand is there, we would open up as COVID restrictions permit, and the availability to provide those services. So I'm willing to listen, and if there's more information that wants to come forward, more people want to speak up to it, that's fine. I know this is just a handful of people, and we can't be you know, making decisions every time 2 or 3 people write in. Just like I said during in the springtime when 20 people wrote in, like, there is a silent majority out there. Although I don't like using that too much, because somebody that you know, is a Southern compatriot down there probably uses it for the wrong term. So I don't want to be misconstrued that way. I just want people to know that, you know, as far as being a counselor, we want to listen to people, and I don't want them to feel like because they wrote in that they should be condemned for that. And I think that we should be as open as possible and provide as much public engagement on this process as we can, because we made the promise to do so.
Thank you, Councillor Butler.
Yeah, if I, to Mayor Ireland's point, if I suggested that someone had been asked to write these letters or put up to it or something, if I suggested that, I misspoke. I apologize. I think that people writing in on this portal is absolutely the best way for people to raise their concerns, and I'm very happy to see the input. The only thing I was concerned about it was if there was a suggestion that council had set the hours or the allocations. Of course we didn't, and so I think that needs to be clear. But this is a really good way for people to send in their requests, and I don't even have a problem were staff to say you should write a letter to council, because staff can't field all the questions on their own if they feel it's an area for council. So absolutely. And I also wanted to just speak to Councillor Wilson's question. It's a really good question that we should have an answer to in any case with respect to budget conversations, right? Like in terms of culture and recreation, what would the budget draft or proposal mean in terms of opening hours of our facilities is a really good question that we probably would be asking in a couple of weeks if it hadn't come up today. So that's something we for sure would want to know going forward in the budget conversations. Thanks.
All right, thank you all. And I thank those letter writers. I think that those positions will help inform our discussions as we move through the budget process, because services do cost money and we have to figure out how we're going to manage all of that. So I thank them for those letters. The additional letter on our agenda is a letter from the Minister of Municipal Affairs telling us, strongly encouraging us to spend our money in a certain way. It perhaps forecasts some difficult issues ahead, but it's important that we know up front that we may be faced with additional challenges as we move forward with capital funding. Is there anything else to discuss regarding the correspondence that we have received? Is there any new business for council? Councillor Demota.
Well, I just wanted to give council a heads up that hopefully within the month, we'll be getting another presentation and update from the skate park committee. I've been talking to Mr. Savage recently, and he's going to be talking with New Line and hopefully getting Trevor from New Line to assist in his presentation to give us an update on there. And we've had a couple of foundations come forward recently that are committed to upping the donation in regards to the skate park by quite a considerable amount. So, you know, I just wanted to start a little buzz that way. The foundations are wanting to remain anonymous at this point, but there is a little bit of excitement started there, and we'll have more of an update, or they'll have a little bit more of an update as time progresses. But hopefully, sometime by the end of November, we'll have something coming forward for them that's quite exciting.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor McGrath.
Just further to that, that's exciting for the skate park. And one thing that I keep writing down on most of my agendas as I'm taking notes, and I just never seem to really have an opportunity to discuss it, though once in a while we're presented with capital budget requests for what administration has planned for the future. I'm curious when we will have an opportunity to say, as a councillor, I wish for this allotment to be dedicated to the skate park in the 2021 budget, or where we have the ability to show our residents what we want to add as far as municipal assets for the well-being of our community's residents. And I seem to be, you know, lacking that process where can I interject my values and insert kind of my wishes for the community. And maybe if this is even just a moment to have administration's ear to show support for adding the skate park to our plans, both for grants and for municipal tax requisition capital expenses, is I feel that the residents that I represent and that elected me would really like to see a skate park built, whether it comes from grant funding or taxpayer dollars.
Councillor, sorry, Mr. Greathead, did you?
Ms. Melanchuk, did you, I saw you unmute there. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, we will be putting it through on the capital plan coming forth, so that it is in the future year, because they missed the opportunity for the CFEP application, but I've noted the year and it will be on the plan going forward for council to make decisions on.
Thank you for that, Councillor Demota.
Yeah, just for some clarification on that, like, because of the application deadline and the grants, like the decision on the CFEP grant won't be made until December of 2021. So we're talking about a 2022 budget line item, and that target is moving because of, you know, the potential for more donations. So the ask from council will likely be more dropped. And I know just from having some conversations with the people involved in coming forward with the donations, that they want as much local grassroots fundraising as possible to maybe match what they're putting forward, to make it more of a community thing and not have to rely on council to come up with the shortcoming. And if you know, I'm sure you'll be really surprised, but when when they show where we're potentially at, with the people coming forward, that ask might be quite a bit smaller than you know, what was first thought. So I hope to keep, you know, start a little spark with this, and then move forward to build something bigger. We only have 6 months really to get it to the mark where we need to help them with their grants. So hopefully through the winter time. It's not the most ideal time to be doing this during a pandemic, but maybe with some more local support, we can get closer to that marker.
Thank you, Councillor Demota and Councillor McGrath. Are there additional council reports? All right, I will report briefly that I did make application to sit again on the AUMA Municipal Governance Committee. And I received word yesterday that I have been selected to sit on that. It has served us, I think, well in the past. So I'm happy to re-engage at that level. And we have our first meeting sometime later this month, and a calendar of meetings spread throughout the year. So I'll keep you updated on the discussions at that level. If there are no, Councillor McGrath.
Sorry, just quickly, I will be at a community conversation tomorrow from 1 to 2 p.m. and I will be missing the library meeting at 4:30 p.m. tomorrow due to work obligations. I do not have an alternate on the library board.
Thank you. If there are no further council reports, any upcoming events? Hearing nothing, I would entertain then a motion to move in camera at 5:05. We have 2 matters to discuss in camera. Councillor Demota, that's a motion to move in camera? It is. Thank you. At 5:05.
I was adjusting my screen, but sure.
Well, I saw a big thumb up close to the camera, so you get credited with a motion to move in camera. All in favor? There are none opposed, so we will go in camera, and I will rely on somebody. Do we just stay here? Staff can let me know, and others will be excluded, and can they then re-engage when we revert to open meeting? Or do we need to log into a new Zoom?
Your worship, just stay on the line for now, perhaps, and we will sort out the details in the background. But yeah, if everyone else can leave the meeting, and if not, we will address that as well. But yeah, for councillors, just stay logged in.
Okay, so I will call for a brief recess just to let the technical things unfold. So let's come back in 4 minutes, 5:10, and commence our in-camera session.